The kingdom didn't fall to armies, it fell to hunger. And when hunger comes for wolves, they eat their own. You want to know what power really looks like? It's not the crown. It's what you become when everything you trusted turns its back and walks away. Stay until the end because this story doesn't give you what you expect. It gives you what you need to survive. Drop a like and comment your city so I know my pack is listening. The snow fell like ash over the graves. Seraphine Vale stood at the shattered window of what used to be her family's throne room and watched the wind bury another body they couldn't afford to burn. 21 years old, beautiful in the way broken glass catches light, and worth exactly what her father could sell her for. The Valtheris fortress had been dying for 3 years. Not the dramatic death of battle, the slow rot of a kingdom that ran out of everything except pride. Outside the walls, villages burned their furniture for warmth. Inside, Lord Cedric Vale sat in a chair that used to mean something and pretended the world wasn't ending. Seraphine pressed her palm against the frozen stone and felt nothing. She'd stopped feeling cold around the same time she stopped believing her father's promises. You learn fast when you're born into a house built on borrowed time. Her breath fogged the air. Beyond the courtyard, soldiers who hadn't been paid in 4 months stood watch over walls that wouldn't hold against a strong wind. The treasury was empty, the granaries were dust, and every noble house within 300 miles knew House Valtheris was carrion. The door behind her opened without ceremony. Her father's voice came rough and tired. Not the voice of a strategist, the voice of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. "They're here." Seraphine didn't turn around. "Who?" "The envoy, from Nocturne." She watched another gust of snow erase the path where her mother used to walk before the fever took her, before everything fell apart. "Tell them we have nothing left to negotiate." "Seraphine." Her father's footsteps crossed the stone, slow, heavy. "This isn't a negotiation." She turned then, looked at the man who used to be legend, Lord Cedric Vale. Once the sharpest military mind in the kingdom, now just another broken aristocrat watching his legacy dissolve. His face looked older than it should. Gray stubble, eyes that didn't sleep anymore. Then what is it? He couldn't meet her gaze. That told her everything. "An offer." The word sat in the air like a blade. Seraphine felt something cold and sharp slide through her chest. Not surprise. She'd known this moment was coming. You always know when you're about to be sold. "From who?" Her father's jaw tightened. "King Draven Kael." The name landed like thunder in an empty hall. Every kingdom north of the sea knew that name. The warlord who'd united the wolf clans through pure brutality. The conqueror who ruled Nocturne Keep like a fortress instead of a palace. Some called him a tyrant. Some called him a savior. Most just called him dangerous. Seraphine had never seen him, but she'd heard the stories. A king who didn't inherit power. He carved it out of the throats of weaker men. And what does the Iron King want with a dying house? Her father finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the terrible truth that fathers learn when they sacrifice their daughters. Shame. "You..." The word was quiet, almost gentle. Like that made it better. Seraphine laughed. It came out sharp and wrong. The kind of sound you make when the last thread holding your world together snaps. "Me." As his queen, she stared at him, really looked at the man who'd raised her, taught her strategy, told her she was born for greatness, and now stood there offering her like livestock to a stranger with a crown. "You're serious?" He's offering full protection, military support, enough resources to rebuild our territories. In exchange for your daughter." Cedric's hands opened and closed at his sides. Empty, useless. "In exchange for an alliance." Seraphine turned back to the window. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying everything, patient and cold. "When?" "Tonight." Of course. Men like Draven Kael didn't wait. They took what they wanted and called it strategy. She felt her father move closer, felt the weight of his desperation pressing against her shoulders. "Seraphine, this is our only chance. Without his support, we're dead before spring. Every one of us. You, me, every soldier out there who still believes in this house. And you think he's saving us out of kindness. I think he's practical. Absorbing House Valtheris expands his empire without a fight. It's good strategy. It's conquest wearing silk. Her father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something she'd never heard before. Fear. You're right, it is. But we don't have anything left to fight with. Seraphine closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she saw her mother's face. Heard her voice from years ago, back when the world still made sense. Power doesn't make you safe. It makes you visible. She opened her eyes. What does he look like? What? The king, Draven. What does he look like? Her father hesitated. I've never met him. They say he's imposing. They say he's a monster. They say a lot of things. Seraphine pressed her forehead against the frozen glass, left a mark in the frost. And if I refuse? Silence. She turned and looked at her father's face, saw the answer there before he spoke. Then we burn, all of us, and every man, woman, and child who depends on this house dies screaming. There it was, the truth that powerful people spend their whole lives avoiding. Sometimes there is no choice. Sometimes survival is the only morality left. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, became the thing her bloodline demanded, a veil. Then I'll meet him. Her father's relief was immediate and pathetic. He reached for her hand. She stepped back. Don't. He froze. Don't pretend this is anything except what it is. You're trading me for survival. Own it. Seraphine, get out. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the door like a man leaving his own execution. At the threshold, he paused. Your mother would have understood. Seraphine's voice came cold and final. My mother would have burned this place to the ground before she sold her daughter to a stranger. The door closed. Seraphine stood alone in the empty throne room and felt the weight of her entire future settling around her shoulders like chains made of ice. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere beyond those walls, a king was coming to claim what he'd already bought. Reshape. The envoy arrived at sunset beneath banners that looked like weapons. Black silk trimmed with silver wolf fur. No crests, no ceremony. Just the cold efficiency of an empire that didn't waste time on pageantry. Seraphine watched from the upper gallery as soldiers in dark armor formed ranks in the courtyard. Not the ceremonial guards of noble courts, real warriors. Men who'd killed and would kill again without hesitation. At the center of the formation rode a figure that made the air itself feel heavier. Draven Kael. Even from a distance, he looked like violence wearing a crown. Tall. Broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of years swinging real steel instead of signing treaties. His armor was functional. Black plate scarred from actual combat. No decorative nonsense. No gold. Just the raw practicality of a man who understood that on a battlefield, beauty gets you killed. His face was harder to read. Strong jaw. Dark hair pulled back from features that might have been handsome if they didn't look so dangerous. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Even from 50 feet away, she felt them lock onto her. Gray, cold, ancient. The eyes of something that had survived too long and learned too much. Her father rushed forward with the practiced smile of a desperate man. Started some speech about honor and alliance. Draven didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge the words at all. He was still looking at Seraphine. She felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, something more primal. The instinct that kicks in when two predators meet and neither knows if they're about to fight or mate. Draven dismounted in one smooth motion, handed his reins to a soldier without looking, started walking toward the keep with the absolute certainty of someone who owned everything he stepped on. Seraphine's hands tightened on the stone railing. This was the man who'd bought her future with political promises and military strength. The conqueror who ruled through fear and tactical brilliance. The legend who'd never lost a war. And he was walking into her home like he already owned it. Something fierce and sharp rose in her throat. No. She turned from the window and moved through the corridors with the swift grace of someone who'd spent 21 years learning how to be invisible when necessary and impossible to ignore when it mattered. By the time Draven Kael reached the throne room, she was already there, standing in front of the empty chair her father didn't deserve. Alone. Unarmed. Wearing a dress the color of winter storms that made her look like she was carved from the same stone as the fortress itself. The doors opened. Draven entered, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. He stopped 10 feet away, looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen empires fall. She looked back with the defiance of someone who'd decided dying on her feet was better than living on her knees. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Draven's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're not what I expected." His voice was rough, deep, the kind of sound that came from shouting orders across battlefields. Seraphine lifted her chin. "You're exactly what I expected. A monster. A king who takes what he wants and calls it destiny." Draven's eyes narrowed slightly. Not anger, something closer to interest. "Your father told you about the arrangement?" "My father told me I'm being sold to secure an alliance. He used prettier words, but that's what it is. And you object." "I object to being treated like currency." Draven took 3 steps closer, each one deliberate, measured, the movement of someone comfortable with violence. "Everyone is currency in this world. The only question is what you're worth. And what am I worth to you?" He stopped just outside her personal space, close enough that she could see the scars on his hands, the faint silver line across his jaw, the absolute absence of doubt in his expression. "More than your father knows." Something dangerous flickered through Seraphine's chest. She pushed it down. "Then you're a fool. I come with a dying house, empty coffers, and enemies who smell blood in the water. I'm a liability wearing silk. You're a veil. The veils are finished." "Not yet." Draven's hand moved. Seraphine tensed, but he wasn't reaching for a weapon. He pulled a rolled parchment from inside his coat, extended it toward her. "The terms." She didn't take it. "I don't need to read them. We both know what they say. You get a wife. My father gets to survive another season, and I get to wear a crown that doesn't belong to me. You think it belongs to me. You took it. That's how crowns work. Someone takes them, someone keeps them. The only difference between a king and a corpse is who's stronger when the dust settles." Seraphine felt her jaw tighten. "Is that your philosophy? Might makes right." "No." Draven's eyes held hers. "Might makes possible. What you do with it after that determines whether you're a king or just another warlord with a fancy chair." She studied his face, looked for the cruelty, the brutality, all the things the stories promised. What she found instead was something infinitely more dangerous. Intelligence. This wasn't a mindless conqueror. This was a tactician, a survivor, someone who understood power the same way she did, as a wound that never stops bleeding. "Why me?" The question came out quieter than she intended. Draven was silent for a moment. When he spoke, something in his voice changed, became almost human. "Because I've met 100 noble daughters who smile and curtsy and say yes to everything while plotting how to survive their husbands. You're the first one who looked at me like you were deciding whether I was worth the trouble of killing." Seraphine's breath caught. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." He took another step. Now they were close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. See the way his chest moved when he breathed. "I'm leaving at dawn, with or without you. If you come, you'll be my queen in name and in fact, not a decoration, not a hostage, an equal partner in building something that lasts longer than the winter. And if I refuse," Draven's expression didn't change, but something cold moved through his eyes. "Then your house falls, your people starve, and your father spends his last days knowing he gambled his daughter's future and lost. So I don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice. Most people just don't like the options." Seraphine felt fury and something else she couldn't name burning in her chest. She stepped closer, invaded his space the way he'd invaded hers. "You're a bastard. Yes. You're using my family's desperation to acquire an asset. Yes. And you don't care that I hate you for it." Draven leaned down slightly, brought his face level with hers. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. "You don't hate me yet. You hate the situation. There's a difference." Their eyes locked. Something electric and dangerous crackled in the space between them, and Seraphine realized with absolute terror that he was right. She didn't hate him. She recognized him. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Her father's voice called out with forced cheer. "Your Majesty, the feast is prepared." "No feast." Draven straightened, stepped back. The warmth vanished from his expression like it had never existed. We leave at dawn. Your daughter has until then to decide. He turned and walked toward the door, paused beside Lord Cedric without looking at him. If she chooses to come, she rides beside me. Not behind. Not as property. As queen. Make sure your people understand that. Then he was gone, leaving Seraphine standing in the empty throne room with her father's desperate eyes on her back and a decision that would define the rest of her life sitting like a blade against her throat. Seraphine didn't sleep. She spent the night walking the corridors of the only home she'd ever known, memorizing the cracks in the stone, the way firelight moved across the ancient tapestries, the sound of wind through the broken sections of wall they couldn't afford to repair. Every step felt like a funeral. In the servants' wing, she found old Margaret sitting by the kitchen fire, the woman who'd raised her after her mother died, who taught her how to read the weather and when to smile and when to let silence do the talking. Margaret looked up when Seraphine entered, didn't seem surprised. Can't sleep or won't sleep? Seraphine sat on the bench across from her, stared into the flames. Does it matter? Always matters. Can't sleep means you're afraid. Won't sleep means you're angry. What if it's both? Margaret's weathered hands wrapped around a cup of something that smelled like herbs and old memories. Then you're human. They sat in silence for a long time, just the crackle of fire and the distant sound of wind against stone. Finally, Seraphine spoke. Tell me the truth. What do you know about Draven Kael? Margaret took a slow sip. I know he's dangerous. Everyone knows that. I know he's fair. That made Seraphine look up. Fair. I had a cousin. Lived in one of the northern territories Draven conquered 5 years ago. Thought it'd be slaughter. Thought they'd all die. And they didn't. He executed the corrupt lords who'd been bleeding the villages dry, redistributed the land, set up trade routes. Last letter I got, she said people were eating again, said the new laws were harsh but honest, said for the first time in 20 years, bandits didn't run the roads. Seraphine felt something complicated twist in her chest. That doesn't make him good. No, but it doesn't make him evil either, just makes him practical. He's using me. Of course he is. Same way your father's using you. Same way every man with power uses everyone around him. Question isn't whether you're being used. Question is what you get in return. Seraphine's hands tightened in her lap. I get to survive. You get to choose what kind of survival. The old woman set down her cup, reached across, and took Seraphine's hand in both of hers. Her skin felt like paper and calluses and 60 years of hard living. You're a Vale, child. That means something. Not the title, not the blood, the will. Your mother had it. Your grandmother had it. That fire that doesn't go out even when everything around you turns to ash. My mother died. She died protecting what she loved. There's worse ways to go. Seraphine felt tears press behind her eyes, refused to let them fall. I'm afraid. Margaret squeezed her hand. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it make your decisions. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten, dawn coming like an execution date. Seraphine stood, leaned down and kissed the old woman's forehead. If I don't come back, you'll come back. Maybe not here, but you'll come back to yourself. That's the only home that matters. Seraphine walked back through the corridors one last time, touched the walls where her mother used to stand, breathed the air her ancestors had breathed for 300 years. Then she went to her chambers and put on traveling clothes built for surviving, not impressing. When the first light broke over the eastern wall, she walked into the courtyard where Draven's soldiers were already mounted and ready. Her father stood near the gates, tried to meet her eyes. She looked right through him. Draven sat on a massive black warhorse that looked like it had been born in the same forge as his armor. When he saw her, something flickered across his face, too quick to read. He extended his hand. Last chance to stay. Seraphine looked at his hand, looked at the fortress crumbling behind her, looked at her father's desperate face. Then she took Draven's hand and let him pull her up behind him on the horse. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. You'll regret this. She wrapped her arms around his waist to steady herself, felt the solidity of him beneath the armor. I already do. Draven's chest moved with something that might have been a laugh. Then he kicked the horse forward, and they rode through the gates of House Vale as snow began to fall, like the sky itself was mourning. Seraphine didn't look back. Looking back was how you turned into stone. Eat. The ride to Nocturne took 4 days. They traveled fast and hard through territory that looked like the world was giving up. Burned villages, empty roads, forests that felt like they were watching. Draven's soldiers moved with military precision. No wasted motion, no unnecessary talk. Seraphine rode beside the king now. He'd given her a horse the second day, a gray mare with intelligent eyes and a mean streak that reminded her of herself. They didn't speak much, but she watched how Draven checked every river crossing personally before letting his men ford it, how he posted sentries with overlapping fields of vision, how he rode to the back of the column during dangerous passages so he'd be the last one exposed if they were ambushed. These weren't the actions of a tyrant, they were the habits of someone who'd lost people and learned from it. On the third night, they camped in the ruins of an old fort. Draven's second in command, a scarred woman named Kira with gray in her hair and death in her eyes, built the fire while others set watch. Seraphine sat close to the flames and tried not to think about how every mile took her further from everything she'd known. Draven approached with 2 canteens and a bundle of dried meat that looked older than time. He offered her both. Eat. Not hungry. Wasn't a question. She took the food. Their fingers brushed. His hands were warm despite the cold. They ate in silence while around them soldiers checked weapons and spoke in low voices about terrain and supply lines. Finally, Seraphine broke. Why did you really come for me? Draven didn't look up from the knife he was sharpening. I told you. You told me half a truth. I want the rest. He was quiet for a long time. The rasp of steel on stone filled the space between them. I saw you once, 3 years ago, during failed peace negotiations with your father. Seraphine's head snapped up. What? You were in the gardens, laughing at something, snow in your hair. You didn't know I was watching, didn't know the world was falling apart around you. You were just alive. Something cold slid through her chest. You're saying you decided to marry me because you saw me laughing in a garden. I'm saying I remembered it when your father sent word that House Vale was collapsing, when he offered the alliance. I remembered that moment, and I made a selfish choice. Seraphine felt her pulse hammering. What choice? Draven looked at her then, really looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much. To want something I couldn't take by force. The honesty of it hit harder than cruelty would have. That's the worst reason I've ever heard. Probably. You're supposed to be calculating, strategic. You built an empire on brutal efficiency. I did. So why throw it away on sentiment? Draven's jaw tightened. Because I'm tired of winning everything and keeping nothing. The words hung in the frozen air like smoke. Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest. Something dangerous and terrifying. You're a fool. Yes, I could destroy you. I know. I don't even like you. Draven smiled then. A real smile that made him look almost human. Yet, before Seraphine could respond, Kira's voice cut through the night. Movement. East Ridge. Every soldier was on their feet in seconds, weapons drawn. Draven moved to the perimeter with the speed of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Seraphine stood frozen as shapes emerged from the darkness. Not enemies, refugees, maybe 20 of them. Thin as ghosts. Eyes hollow with starvation. A woman at the front held a child who wasn't moving. Draven's hand went to his sword, but he didn't draw. The woman stumbled forward, fell to her knees. Please, we've been walking for days. The villages are dead. Everyone's dead. We heard rumors of a king who feeds his people. Please. Draven looked at them for a long moment, calculating, measuring. Then he turned to Kira. Give them half our supplies. Send 2 riders ahead to the next outpost. Tell them to prepare shelter. Kira's expression didn't change. Half leaves us short for the journey. We'll manage. Your Majesty, that's an order. The soldiers moved immediately, started distributing food and blankets. The refugees wept, actual tears, like they'd forgotten kindness was possible. Seraphine watched Draven's face, saw the weight of the decision settle across his shoulders. She moved beside him, kept her voice low. You just gave away resources you might need. Yes, that's not practical. No, it's necessary. What's the difference? Draven looked at the refugees being tended by his soldiers. Practical keeps you alive. Necessary is what you do when being alive isn't enough. In that moment, Seraphine understood something that changed everything. Draven Kael wasn't a monster pretending to be human. He was a human pretending being a monster was enough. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him, while the fire burned low and the refugees slowly stopped looking like corpses. And somewhere deep in her chest, something that felt dangerously like respect took root. Attack. They reached Nocturne on the 4th day. Seraphine's first view of the fortress stole her breath. It rose from the cliffs like something carved by wolves instead of masons. Black stone that looked older than kingdoms, towers that pierced the sky like weapons. Everything about it screamed danger and permanence. This wasn't a castle built for beauty. This was a stronghold built to survive the end of the world. As they rode through the outer gates, soldiers saluted with fists over hearts. Citizens stopped and stared. Not with fear, with something closer to reverence. Draven dismounted in the main courtyard and immediately disappeared into a strategy meeting with his generals. Kira appeared at Seraphine's side. This way. She led her through corridors that smelled like steel and old stone. No tapestries, no gold, just clean lines and functional design. They stopped in front of massive doors. Your chambers. Seraphine stepped inside and stopped. The room was enormous, high ceilings, windows overlooking the entire kingdom. A bed big enough to get lost in, and on the far wall a collection of books that made her chest ache. Military strategy, economics, trade law, philosophy, real books, not decoration. Kira watched her face. He had them brought up yesterday, said you'd need them. He doesn't even know me. He knows you're not stupid. That's more than most people bother learning. The older woman turned to leave, paused at the door. Fair warning. The nobles here don't trust outsiders. They'll test you, try to find weaknesses. Show them any and they'll tear you apart. Thanks for the encouragement. Kira's scarred mouth curved slightly. You look like you can handle it. Then she was gone. Seraphine stood alone in chambers bigger than her entire wing back home and felt the weight of her new reality settling around her. She was queen of an empire built on blood and winter. And she had absolutely no idea how to survive it. The War Council happened 3 days later. Seraphine wasn't invited. That lasted exactly one meeting. She walked into the strategy room without announcement while 7 generals and Draven stood around a map covered in tactical markers. Every head turned. The room went silent. Draven's expression didn't change. This is a closed council. Seraphine moved to the table, looked at the map, recognized immediately what they were planning. You're moving resources from the western border to reinforce the eastern front. That leaves the mountain passes exposed. One of the generals, a heavy-set man with medals covering his chest, sneered. The mountains are impassable this time of year. For a full army, not for raiders, you leave those passes undefended, you're inviting... With respect, Your Majesty. The general's voice dripped condescension. Strategic planning is an appropriate dinner conversation. Seraphine's eyes went cold. I'm not here for dinner. Another general stepped forward, younger, ambitious eyes. Perhaps the queen would be more comfortable overseeing the household staff. Perhaps the general would be more comfortable explaining why he's about to get 300 men killed through arrogance. The room froze. Draven's voice cut through the silence. Explain. Seraphine pointed to the map. These supply lines run through Wolf's Pass. It's the fastest route. It's also where raiders from the Iron Cliffs have been operating for 6 months. They hit fast, burn everything, disappear into the mountains. You send a convoy through there without proper scouts and heavy escort, you're feeding them. The young general's face flushed. That's speculation. That's reality. My father negotiated with the Iron Cliff Raiders twice. I sat in those meetings. I know how they think. She looked at Draven, held his gaze. You want to move supplies east. Fine. Send them south through the valley routes. Takes 4 days longer but arrives intact, or you can gamble 300 lives on pride. Every general was staring at her now. Draven studied the map, then looked at Kira. Verify her information. Your Majesty, this is... Now. Kira left. Came back 10 minutes later with updated intelligence reports. Her face was stone. She's right. Raiders hit a merchant convoy in Wolf's Pass 2 weeks ago. Total loss. The room erupted. Seraphine stood perfectly still while generals argued, and Draven's eyes never left her face. Finally, he raised one hand. Silence. The Queen's recommendation stands. Reroute through the Southern Valley. Double the scouts. Kira, coordinate. The generals looked like they'd swallowed glass, but they nodded. Draven's voice dropped to something colder. And if anyone in this room questions Her Majesty's presence again, they can explain to me personally why military strategy is more important than not dying stupid. Seraphine felt something fierce and hot burn through her chest. The meeting continued. She stayed. And by the time it ended, every person in that room understood something fundamental had changed. The Queen wasn't decoration. She was dangerous. That night, Draven found her on the battlements. She'd been standing there for an hour, watching lights spread across the valley below, thousands of them. People living and working and surviving under the protection of the empire Draven had built through blood and will. He stopped beside her, didn't speak immediately. Finally, "You made enemies today. Good. Most queens try to make allies. Most queens end up poisoned." Draven's mouth curved. Fair. They stood in silence while wind moved through the towers around them. That move in the council. His voice was quiet, almost careful. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "Why?" Seraphine turned and looked at him, really looked at the man who'd bought her future and given her books and let her walk into a war council like she belonged there. "Because you didn't bring me here to smile and wave. You brought me here because you saw something in me that day in the garden, something you recognized." "What?" "The same hunger that drives you, the same refusal to accept powerlessness, the same understanding that the world is cruel and the only choice is whether you survive it or let it eat you alive." Draven's eyes held hers, gray and ancient and tired. "You're terrifying." "Good." He laughed, actually laughed. The sound caught her off guard. "What?" "Nothing, just, I spent 3 years building this empire. Thought I'd seen everything. Then you walk in and prove me wrong in one afternoon." Something warm and dangerous moved through Seraphine's chest. She looked away, back at the lights below. "Those people down there, the ones living under your protection, do they love you or fear you?" Draven was quiet for a moment. "Both. Neither. They respect that I keep them alive." "Is that enough?" "It has to be." "Why?" He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw past the armor. Saw the scars, the exhaustion, the weight of carrying an empire on shoulders that were still human underneath the legend. Because love without power is just waiting to die, and power without purpose is just cruelty with better furniture. So I choose the third option: protection, order, rules that apply to everyone including me. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Seraphine felt something shift between them, some invisible wall starting to crack. "I don't trust you yet." "Good. Trust gets people killed. But I respect what you're trying to build here." Draven's hand moved, stopped, then slowly reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness. "That's more than I expected." Their eyes locked. And in that moment, standing on battlements overlooking an empire built on blood and winter, Seraphine realized she was in serious trouble, because she was starting to care. Before either could speak, a soldier burst onto the battlements, face pale, breathing hard. "Your Majesty, emergency council, now." Draven's expression shifted instantly, back to the king. "What happened?" The soldier's voice shook. "The Eastern Territories, they're under attack." "By who?" The soldier met Draven's eyes with the look of someone delivering their own death sentence. "Lord Cedric Vale. He's leading a rebellion, and he's burning everything." Seraphine's world stopped. Her father, the man who'd sold her to save himself, was now destroying the very empire he'd begged to join. And standing there in the wind with Draven's shocked eyes on her face, she understood with perfect clarity that her father had never intended to survive through alliance. He'd planned to survive through her destruction, The betrayal was so complete, so perfectly orchestrated, that for a moment she couldn't breathe. Then Draven's hand was on her arm, steady, grounding. Seraphine. She pulled away, turned and walked toward the tower stairs with her mind already moving through implications and strategies and the terrible mathematics of war. Behind her, Draven's voice called out, "Where are you going?" She didn't stop, didn't look back. To war. The war room filled within minutes. Generals poured in like blood to a wound. Maps unrolled, markers scattered. Every face carried the same expression, controlled panic wrapped in military discipline. Seraphine stood against the wall and watched Draven transform. The man who'd tucked hair behind her ear 5 minutes ago disappeared. What remained was pure tactical violence. A king who'd built an empire by understanding that hesitation killed faster than swords. Kira spread intelligence reports across the table. Her voice came flat and efficient. Reports from the eastern border. 3 villages burned, supply routes cut. Lord Cedric Vale commanding an alliance of displaced nobles and mercenary companies. Approximately 2,000 fighters. Moving fast, hitting hard, using scorched earth tactics. One of the generals slammed his fist on the table. The sound cracked through the room like breaking bone. We should have executed him when we had the chance. Draven's eyes stayed on the map. Where? The general pointed. Here, here, and here, following the river valley, burning everything behind them so we can't resupply. Smart. Seraphine's voice cut through the discussion. Every head turned. She pushed off the wall and moved to the table. He knows you'll chase him. He's drawing you away from the fortress, stretching your supply lines, waiting for you to overcommit. The young general from before sneered. You would defend your father's strategy. I'm explaining it. There's a difference. Draven's hand moved across the map, following lines, reading terrain like a language only killers understood. He's right. She's right. Cedric's gambling I'll react with anger instead of strategy. He wants me to chase him into the mountains where his smaller force has advantage. So what do we do? Kira's question was genuine, not a challenge. A request for orders. Draven was silent for a long moment. Seraphine watched his mind work, saw him calculate casualties and resources and time, like a man solving equations written in blood. Finally he looked up, and his eyes found Seraphine first. We divide forces. Half stay to defend the fortress and maintain supply to our northern territories. Half deploy east. But we don't chase him. Then what? The older general's voice was sharp. We cut him off. He's moving fast, which means he's staying light. He'll need to resupply eventually. When he does, we're already there. Another general leaned forward. That requires knowing where he'll go. Draven looked at Seraphine again. Something passed between them, an understanding that felt dangerous. He turned back to his commanders. It requires someone who knows how Cedric thinks. The room went very quiet. Seraphine felt every eye on her, felt the weight of what was being asked without words. You want me to predict my father's movements. I want you to help us end this before thousands die. Draven's voice stayed level, but beneath it she heard something else. Not a command, a question. She looked at the map, at the burned villages, at the routes her father would take because she'd watched him plan campaigns her entire childhood. Something cold and sharp settled in her chest. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything after. She could refuse, stay neutral, let Draven handle his own war, or she could become exactly what the Empire needed her to be, a queen who understood that survival required decisions that left scars. She stepped to the table, placed her finger on the map. Here, 3 days from now. There's an old supply depot. My father used it during the border conflicts. If he's running a scorched earth campaign, he'll need food and weapons. He'll go there. Are you certain? Kira's eyes were sharp. No. But I'm right. Draven studied her face, searching for something. Doubt, hesitation, anything that would indicate weakness. She looked back with the cold clarity of someone who'd just chosen war over blood. He nodded once, then turned to his generals. We move in 2 hours. Light cavalry, fast strike. We reach the depot first and fortify. When Cedric arrives, we end this. The generals dispersed immediately, barking orders, mobilizing troops. Within seconds, only Draven and Seraphine remained, The silence between them felt heavy enough to break stone. You didn't have to do that. His voice was quiet. Yes, I did. He betrayed you. He betrayed everything, including himself. That's why I know I'm right. A man that desperate follows patterns. He can't help it. Draven moved closer. Not touching, just present. This will hurt. Everything hurts. The question is whether the pain serves a purpose. She met his eyes, saw something there that made her chest tighten. Respect. Real and unguarded. You're going to make a terrifying queen. I already am. His mouth curved slightly. Then he turned toward the door. Stopped. Seraphine. If this goes wrong, I know what war costs. Don't protect me from it. I'm not protecting you from war. I'm protecting you from regret. The words landed soft and devastating. She didn't answer, just watched him leave to prepare for a campaign that would end with her father dead or captured. And standing alone in the war room with maps covered in tactical markers and the smell of smoke already burning in her memory, Seraphine understood something that powerful people spend their entire lives denying. Love and war were the same language. Both required you to destroy what you couldn't save. The ride east was brutal. 200 cavalry moving at speed through terrain that wanted them dead. Frozen rivers. Mountain passes where one wrong step meant falling into nothing. Forests so dense the darkness felt alive. Seraphine rode near the front beside Draven and Kira. She'd refused to stay at the fortress, refused to let someone else finish what she'd started. Draven hadn't argued, just given her armor that fit and a blade that felt right in her hand. You know how to use that? Kira had asked while helping her strap the weapon in place. I was raised by a military strategist. He made sure I understood that pretty girls who can't fight become casualties. The older woman's scarred face had shown something like approval. Good. Don't get killed. I'm tired of training new people. Now they moved through darkness with only moonlight and instinct for guidance. Seraphine's thighs burned from hours in the saddle. Her hands were numb. Her face felt like frozen leather. She didn't complain. Complaining was how you proved you didn't belong. Around midnight on the second night, they stopped to rest the horses. Soldiers collapsed where they stood. Some slept. Some stared into nothing with the 1,000-yard gaze of people who'd seen too much. Seraphine found a flat rock and sat, pulled out the dried meat and water, forced herself to eat even though her stomach was twisted with something that felt suspiciously like fear. Draven appeared beside her, lowered himself to the ground with a grunt that said his body was as wrecked as everyone else's. They ate in silence for a while. Then his voice came quiet, meant only for her. You can still turn back. No, I can't. You didn't choose this war. I chose to survive it. Same thing. He was quiet for a moment, not sleeping, thinking. What was he like? Before. Seraphine didn't pretend to misunderstand. She looked at the stars barely visible through the canopy above. Brilliant. Legitimately one of the smartest tacticians in the kingdom. He could read a battlefield like other people read books. Predict enemy movements 3 steps ahead. Win fights before they started. Draven waited. Patient. And cruel. Not in an obvious way. In the way powerful men are cruel when they stop seeing people as real. When strategy becomes more important than the lives being sacrificed for it. Did he love you? The question landed like a blade between ribs. Seraphine exhaled slowly, watching her breath fog the frozen air. I don't know. I think he loved the idea of me. A perfect daughter who'd secure his legacy, extend his influence. But me, the actual person, I don't think he ever saw that. Draven's jaw tightened. She could see it even in the darkness. That's not love. No, it's ownership. There's a difference. They sat in silence while around them soldiers dreamed of warm beds and the faces of people they might never see again. Finally, Draven spoke again, his voice rough with something that might have been shame. I brought you into this. I walked into it, eyes open. That doesn't make it right. Nothing about any of this is right. But here we are. She turned and looked at him. Really looked at the man who'd conquered territories and built an empire and still somehow thought he needed to apologize for surviving. You're not responsible for my father's choices. Or mine. I'm responsible for everything inside my borders. That's what the crown means. Then we're both carrying weight we didn't ask for. Welcome to royalty. Draven's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Something sadder. You're going to be trouble. I already am. He looked at her then with those gray eyes that had seen kingdoms fall, and something passed between them, some recognition that went deeper than strategy or alliance. Two people who understood that power was just loneliness with better furniture. Seraphine felt her chest tighten, felt something dangerous rising like water behind a cracking dam. She stood abruptly, needed distance before she said something irreversible. Get some rest. Tomorrow we find out if I'm right or if I just led 200 men to die for nothing. Draven stood too, slower, like his body was remembering every battle it had survived. Seraphine. She paused. If you're right, if we find him, what do you want me to do? The question hung in the frozen air like an execution order waiting to be signed. She didn't turn around, didn't trust herself to look at him. Whatever ends this. I don't care. But they both knew it was a lie. She cared, and that was going to make everything infinitely worse. They reached the depot at dawn on the third day. Seraphine had been right. The old supply station sat in a valley carved between mountains like a wound in the earth. Stone buildings half collapsed from years of neglect. But the bones were still there, still functional, still exactly what a desperate army would need. Draven's forces moved into position with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who'd done this before. Fortifying entrances, setting ambush points, turning the terrain into a trap. Kira coordinated everything with sharp commands and zero tolerance for mistakes. Seraphine stayed near Draven, watching, learning, understanding how wars were actually won, not through glorious charges, through preparation and patience and knowing where your enemy would be before they did. The sun climbed higher. Soldiers took positions. The valley went silent except for wind moving through abandoned buildings like the ghost of something that used to matter. Then Kira appeared beside Draven. Her face was stone. Scouts report movement, 2 miles out. Approximately 1,500 fighters, flying veil banners. Draven's expression didn't change, but his hand went to his sword. Estimated arrival. Within the hour. He turned to Seraphine. His eyes searched hers for something. Permission. Understanding. Forgiveness for what was about to happen. Last chance. She shook her head. I'm staying. Then get behind our lines. When this starts, I know what happens when it starts. Don't treat me like I'm fragile. I'm not. I'm treating you like someone I don't want to watch die. The honesty of it stole her breath. But she lifted her chin, met his gaze with the defiance of someone who'd chosen this path and would walk it to the end. Then don't watch. Draven held her eyes for one more second, then nodded and turned to his commanders. Standard containment formation. Let them enter the valley. Close behind them. No retreat, no surrender. We end this today. The generals dispersed. Seraphine found a position near the northern ridge with a clear view of the valley floor. Her hand rested on the sword Draven had given her. The weight felt foreign and right at the same time. Around her, soldiers checked weapons and muttered prayers to gods that probably weren't listening. Then the waiting. That terrible suspension between peace and violence where time moves like honey and every breath feels stolen. Seraphine watched the valley entrance with her heart hammering against her ribs, and tried not to think about the fact that somewhere in the approaching army rode the man who'd taught her how to read, how to think, how to survive a world that ate weakness for breakfast. The man who'd sold her like livestock and was now burning the empire he'd begged to join. Her father. Movement. The first ranks appeared at the valley mouth. Soldiers in mismatched armor. Mercenaries and displaced fighters carrying weapons that had seen too much use. And at their center, riding beneath crimson banners, Lord Cedric Vale. Even from a distance, she recognized him. The way he sat his horse, the way he surveyed terrain with that calculating gaze that missed nothing. He was thinner, older, desperation wearing the shape of a man, but still her father. Seraphine's throat tightened. Her hand clenched on the sword grip. Cedric's army moved into the valley like water filling a basin, spreading out, approaching the depot buildings with the caution of soldiers who knew ambushes were possible, but not certain enough to stop. That was his mistake. Draven waited until half the force was inside the valley. Committed. Exposed. Then his hand dropped. The signal. Archers rose from concealment and loosed. Arrows fell like steel rain. Men screamed. Horses panicked. The neat formation shattered into chaos. Cavalry erupted from hidden positions. Draven at the front, his sword already red before the charge even fully formed. The valley exploded into violence. Seraphine watched from her ridge as battles she'd only read about became horrifyingly real. The sound of steel on steel, bodies falling, blood turning frozen ground into mud. And through it all, Draven moved like death wearing a crown. He didn't just fight, he executed. Every movement precise, efficient. The trained brutality of someone who'd killed so many times it became muscle memory. But it was what happened next that broke something inside her. Because Cedric saw Draven cutting through his forces, saw the trap closing, saw his rebellion dying in real time. And he ran, not a tactical retreat, pure cowardice. He wheeled his horse and broke for the valley exit with maybe 50 riders, abandoning the army he'd led to slaughter. Seraphine felt something cold and furious rise in her chest. She moved without thinking, down the ridge, across the battlefield, dodging corpses and fighting men, every instinct screaming that this was insane. She didn't care, because she'd spent her entire life watching her father make decisions that served only himself. Watching him sacrifice others to save his own skin. Watching him pretend it was strategy instead of selfishness. Not anymore. She kicked her horse into a dead run, chasing the man who'd created her and destroyed everything she could have been. Behind her, she heard Draven's voice roaring her name. She didn't stop. The chase lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like falling through time itself. Then her horse caught Cedric's, drew alongside, and she threw herself from the saddle directly at him. They hit the ground hard, rolled, came up with her blade at his throat and his eyes wide with shock. The battle sounds faded. Or maybe her ears just stopped working. All she could hear was her own ragged breathing and her father's terrified gasps. "Seraphine," his voice cracked. "Please." She pressed the blade harder. "Drew blood. You burned villages, killed civilians, started a war that's going to leave thousands dead. For what? Survival. The same thing you chose. I chose to survive with honor. You chose to burn everything rather than admit you were wrong." Cedric's face twisted, something between rage and desperation. "You think you're different. You think marrying that monster makes you righteous. But you're just like me. You sold yourself to survive." The words hit harder than fists, because part of her wondered if he was right. Then Draven's voice came from behind her. Quiet, dangerous. "Step away from him." Seraphine didn't move, didn't turn. "He's right, isn't he? I'm no different." Draven moved into her peripheral vision, blood on his armor, exhaustion in every line of his body. "You're nothing like him." "How do you know?" "Because he ran. You charged into fire. There's a difference." Cedric laughed. The sound came broken and wrong. "You're both delusional. You think this empire will last. You think strength is enough. It's not. Everything burns eventually." Seraphine looked down at her father, at the man who'd taught her everything and nothing, and she made the choice that separated rulers from tyrants. She lowered the blade. Cedric's eyes widened, hope flickering across his face like a candle in a storm. Then Seraphine spoke, her voice cold and final. "You're right. Everything burns, but I'm not going to be the one holding the torch." She stood, stepped back. Draven's soldiers moved forward, pulled Cedric to his feet, bound his hands with the efficient brutality of men who'd done this too many times. Cedric stared at her, something like understanding finally dawning in his eyes. "You're going to let him execute me?" "No." Seraphine's throat felt raw. "I'm going to let justice decide." "There's a difference." "Justice." Cedric spat blood. "There's no such thing as justice, only power and the people who pretend otherwise. Then you'll die believing nothing mattered." Seraphine turned away, started walking toward where soldiers were gathering the survivors. "That's worse than any execution." Behind her, her father's voice rose to a scream. "You're condemning yourself. You think you can build something good with him. You can't. He's a killer, a conqueror. He'll destroy you the same way he destroys everything." Seraphine kept walking, because the terrible truth was that part of her agreed, but she was choosing to try anyway, and maybe that was what separated hope from delusion. The willingness to build knowing everything might collapse. Well, the valley fell silent as the sun climbed higher. Bodies covered the ground like a carpet woven from mistakes and desperation. Draven's soldiers moved through the aftermath with grim efficiency, tending wounded, gathering dead, separating prisoners. The rebellion was over. Cedric's forces had been crushed. The survivors surrendered when they saw their commander in chains. Seraphine sat on a broken wall and watched smoke rise from fires that were already burning out. Her hand shook, not from cold, from the adrenaline crash that comes after violence. She'd watched men die, watched Draven kill with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it so many times it became reflex, and she'd held a blade to her own father's throat. The person she'd been 3 weeks ago would have collapsed. The person she was becoming just felt numb. Draven found her as the sun reached its peak. He sat beside her without asking, just present, his armor still covered in blood and dirt and the physical proof of war. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Seraphine's voice came quiet and broken. I almost killed him. I know. Why didn't I? Draven looked at her, his gray eyes tired but honest. Because you're stronger than he is. That's not strength. That's weakness pretending to be mercy. No. Weakness is running. Weakness is sacrificing others to save yourself. You looked at the man who betrayed you and chose to be better than him. That's not weakness. That's evolution. The words settled over her like a blanket made of hope and terror. She turned and really looked at him, at the king who'd conquered territories and built an empire and still somehow believed that being better was possible. What happens to him now? Trial. Public. Honest. He answers for what he's done. Then the law decides. And if the law says execution, Draven's jaw tightened, then that's what happens. Will you do it? Personally? He was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. No. I'll have someone else. You shouldn't have to watch. Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she'd been holding that suddenly felt too heavy to carry. I don't know if I can be what this empire needs. The admission came out raw and honest, the kind of truth you only say when pretending costs more than vulnerability. Draven's hand moved, covered hers. His palm was warm despite the cold. You already are. How do you know? Because you're still here, still fighting, still choosing to build instead of burn. That's all anyone can do. Seraphine felt tears pressing behind her eyes, refused to let them fall. I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you alive. Just don't let it make your decisions. The words echoed something Margaret had said a lifetime ago. Back when Seraphine thought survival was the hardest thing she'd ever face. Now she understood. Survival was easy. Staying human while you did it was the hard part. She looked at Draven's hand on hers, at the scars and calluses, and the evidence of a life spent fighting. Then she turned her hand over, laced her fingers through his, felt him tense, then relax, then hold on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. They sat like that while the sun moved across the sky and soldiers cleaned up the wreckage of a war that should never have happened. And Seraphine understood something that changed everything. She didn't love him yet, but she could see the shape of it, the possibility. Like looking at a map of territory she hadn't explored but knew she would. That terrified her more than any battle, because love was the one war you couldn't win through strategy. The journey back to Nocturne took 5 days. They moved slower, carrying wounded, guarding prisoners, processing the weight of what had happened. Cedric rode in chains near the center of the formation. Seraphine never looked at him, never spoke to him. Some wounds were too deep to heal. Some relationships didn't survive betrayal. On the 4th night, Kira approached Seraphine while she was checking her horse's hooves. The older woman's expression was unreadable. She stood there for a moment like she was deciding something, then spoke. You did well. On the ridge. During the fight. I didn't fight. I chased my father like an idiot and almost got killed. You made a choice when it mattered. That's more than most people manage. Seraphine looked up, met Kira's scarred face. You don't like me. Kira's mouth curved slightly. I don't trust easily, but I respect you. Why? Because you could have stayed safe at the fortress. Could have let someone else handle your father. Instead, you rode into a war zone and made the hard choice when the moment came. That's what queens do. The words settled into Seraphine's chest like stones in a river. Heavy but permanent. I don't feel like a queen. Good. The ones who do usually end up dead or corrupt. Self-doubt keeps you honest. Kira turned to leave, paused. He cares about you. More than he's cared about anyone in years. Don't waste it. Then she was gone, leaving Seraphine standing in the darkness with her horse and thoughts that felt too big for her skull. That night, she couldn't sleep. She left her tent and walked to the edge of camp where sentries watched the darkness and fires burned low. Found Draven standing near the tree line, alone. Looking at something only he could see, she approached quietly, stopped beside him. Can't sleep either. His voice came rough. No. They stood in silence while wind moved through branches overhead. Finally, Seraphine spoke. The question that had been burning in her chest since the valley. How many people have you killed? Draven didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried weight that felt older than time. I stopped counting after the first 100. The honesty was brutal. Does it get easier? No. It gets normal. That's worse. Seraphine absorbed that. Let it settle. Do you regret it? Some of them. Most of them were necessary. Enemies who would have killed me or destroyed what I was trying to build. But some. Yeah. I regret those. Which ones? The ones who didn't have to die. The ones I killed because I was angry or afraid or too tired to find another way. She looked at him. At the profile of a man carrying more ghosts than any person should. How do you live with it? Draven's jaw tightened. I build things, roads, trade routes, laws that protect people. I can't undo what I've done, but I can make sure it mattered. Make sure the death served a purpose beyond just keeping me alive. That's not redemption. No, it's just survival with intention. Redemption's not real. It's a story weak people tell themselves to avoid accountability. Seraphine felt something shift in her understanding. This was who Draven really was. Not the legend, not the conqueror. A man who'd done terrible things and chosen to build something anyway. Not because he believed he deserved forgiveness, but because the alternative was giving up. And giving up meant all those deaths were just violence without meaning. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat coming off him. I'm afraid of who I'm becoming. Draven turned, looked down at her with eyes that had seen kingdoms fall and still somehow held something like gentleness. Who are you becoming? Someone who can watch her father put in chains and feel nothing. Someone who can stand on a battlefield and calculate casualties like they're numbers instead of lives. His hand came up, cupped her face with surprising tenderness. You're becoming someone who survives. That's not the same as losing your humanity. It's just learning when compassion is strength and when it's suicide. But what if I can't tell the difference anymore? Then you keep people around you who can. People who'll tell you when you're crossing lines. Like you. Like me. Like Kira. Like anyone who gives a damn about more than just power. Seraphine felt her eyes burning, felt tears finally breaking through the walls she'd built. I don't want to be like him. Draven's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching salt water. You're not. You'll never be. You know how I know. How? Because you're asking the question. People like your father never wonder if they've gone too far. They just keep taking until there's nothing left. The tears came harder, silent and devastating. Draven pulled her against his chest, let her cry into armor that smelled like smoke and steel and the terrible cost of survival. And standing there in the darkness with a king's arms around her and an empire burning in the distance, Seraphine finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her years ago. Power doesn't make you safe, but choosing the right people to share it with might. They reached Nocturne as winter truly arrived. Snow fell heavy and constant, covering the world in white that looked clean but hid everything ugly underneath. The fortress welcomed them back with military efficiency. Soldiers dispersed to barracks, wounded to medical wings, prisoners to cells deep beneath the keep. Seraphine walked through corridors that were starting to feel familiar and tried not to think about the trial coming. The trial where her father would answer for treason, where justice would be public and brutal and final. She found her chambers and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing travel-stained clothes, too exhausted to care. Sleep came immediate and dreamless. When she woke, the room was dark and someone was knocking. She stumbled to the door, opened it. Draven stood there looking as wrecked as she felt. Clean, but exhausted. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside. He entered, moved to the window overlooking the city below. Thousands of lights burning against the darkness. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Draven spoke without turning around. "The trial is in 3 days. Public square, full transparency. Your father will have counsel, will be allowed to defend himself, and then the law decides. If he's found guilty of treason, the sentence is death." Seraphine's chest tightened. "Will you make me watch?" "No. But you can if you want to." She moved beside him, looked out at the empire her father had tried to destroy. "I don't know what I want. That's honest." Draven turned, faced her fully. "Seraphine, what happened in that valley? What you did? Choosing mercy when you had every right to kill him. That mattered. To who? To me. To everyone watching. To history. History doesn't care about mercy. It cares about who wins. No. History cares about what you build. Battles are footnotes. Empires are what last." His hand came up, hesitated, then gently tucked hair behind her ear the way he had that first night on the battlements. "I need you to know something." "What?" "I didn't bring you here just for political advantage. I didn't marry you to absorb your house." "Then why?" "Because I saw something in you that day in the garden. Something I recognized. The same refusal to break that drives me. The same understanding that the world is cruel and the only choice is whether you let it define you." Seraphine felt her breath catch. "That's not love." "No." Draven's voice dropped, became something raw and honest. "But it could be. If you let it." The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Seraphine looked at him, really looked at the man who'd conquered territories and built an empire, and still somehow believed love was possible. And she made a choice that terrified her more than any battle. She kissed him. Not gentle, not tentative, fierce and desperate and real. Draven froze for half a second. Then his arms came around her like he'd been waiting his entire life for permission. They broke apart, breathing hard. His forehead pressed against hers. His voice came rough and wrecked. "This complicates everything. I know. If you regret this, I won't." "How do you know?" "Because I'm done pretending I'm not terrified. Done pretending I don't care. Done pretending survival is enough." "What do you want?" Seraphine pulled back, looked into gray eyes that had seen kingdoms fall and still held something like hope. "I want to build something that lasts, something worth the cost. With you." Draven's hands cupped her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones like he was memorizing the shape of something he couldn't afford to lose. "Then stay. Not because you have to, because you choose to." Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest, some final wall she'd been holding that suddenly felt unnecessary. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose the empire we're building, even if it's terrifying and impossible and probably doomed." Draven kissed her again. Slower this time, like he was learning a language he'd forgotten existed. And in that moment, with snow falling outside and an empire burning itself clean, Seraphine understood the final truth about power. It wasn't the crown, it wasn't the armies or the territory or the laws. It was this: two people choosing each other when the world gave them every reason not to. That was the kind of power that lasted. Uncut. The trial happened exactly as promised. Public, transparent, brutal. Lord Cedric Vale stood in chains before a tribunal of judges and military commanders. The charges were read: treason, murder, inciting rebellion. The evidence was overwhelming. Cedric defended himself with the desperate eloquence of a man who knew he was already dead. He claimed justification, claimed Draven was a tyrant, claimed everything he'd done was to save his people. The judges didn't buy it. Neither did the crowd watching from the square. Seraphine stood on the royal balcony beside Draven and watched her father's world collapse in real time. She felt nothing, not satisfaction, not grief, just the cold clarity of someone who'd moved past caring. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. guilty. The sentence was death, execution at dawn. Cedric looked up at the balcony. His eyes found Seraphine, and for just a moment she saw something that might have been regret. Too little, too late. Draven's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "You can leave. You don't have to watch this." "I know." But she stayed anyway, because some endings needed witnesses. That night, alone in her chambers, Seraphine finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The grief, the rage, the terrible freedom of knowing her father would be gone by morning. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she washed her face and walked to Draven's chambers, found him standing by the fire, looking like a man carrying the weight of empires. She crossed the room, wrapped her arms around him from behind, felt him tense, then relax into her touch. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing, just present. Finally, Draven spoke, his voice rough with something that might have been shame. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For all of it. For bringing you into this. For making you watch your father die. For—" "Stop!" Seraphine turned him around, made him look at her. "You didn't make me do anything. I chose. Every step, every decision, that's mine. Own your choices, but don't take mine." Draven's eyes searched hers, looking for blame he wouldn't find. What she gave him instead was something more dangerous. Trust. The kind that didn't need words. That night they didn't speak about tomorrow, didn't plan or strategize or calculate. They just held each other like two people who'd survived a war and were learning how to live with what came after. And when dawn came and the execution happened and Lord Cedric Vale stopped being a threat and became just another name in history, Seraphine stood on the battlements beside Draven and understood the final lesson. Kingdoms fell. Empires crumbled. Power shifted like sand. But some bonds were forged in fire hot enough to reshape everything. And maybe that was the point, not to avoid the flames, but to become something stronger because of them. Below them, the city moved into mourning. Thousands of people living and working and surviving under laws that were harsh but fair. Draven's arm came around her shoulders. She leaned into him, and together they watched the sun rise over an empire built on blood and choice, and the terrible hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make it mean something. The point of no return had passed. There was no going back to who they'd been, only forward into whoever they were becoming. Together. 3 months after the execution, the empire looked like it was thriving. Trade routes reopened, villages rebuilt. The eastern territories that Cedric had burned slowly recovered under new governance that actually gave a damn about keeping people alive. Seraphine threw herself into the work with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. She spent mornings in council meetings dissecting tax policies and grain distribution, afternoons visiting territories where nobles still looked at her like she was an outsider pretending to belong, evenings studying military logistics and the brutal economics of keeping an empire fed through winter. Draven watched her with something between admiration and concern. "You're going to burn out." She looked up from reports covering the table in their shared chambers, numbers swimming before her eyes. "I'm fine. You haven't slept more than 4 hours in a week. Sleep is for people who don't have provinces to rebuild." Seraphine. His voice came gentle, the tone he used when he was trying not to sound worried and failing. She set down the parchment, rubbed her eyes until colors bloomed behind her eyelids. "I need to stay busy. If I stop moving, I start thinking. About your father, about everything." Draven moved behind her chair. His hand settled on her shoulders, started working the knots that had become permanent fixtures. She let her head fall forward, let the touch ground her. "The council trusts you now. The generals respect you. The people are starting to see you as more than just the conquered bride. You've proven yourself 10 times over. Then why does it still feel like I'm walking on ice? Because you're smart enough to know that power is temporary, that everything we build can collapse if we stop paying attention." His fingers dug into a particularly stubborn knot. She hissed, "But you can't carry it alone. That's why you have me. Why you have Kira. Why you have people." Seraphine closed her eyes, let herself just feel for a moment. "When did you become wise?" Draven's mouth curved against her hair. "Around the same time you became terrifying." They stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just present in a moment that felt almost peaceful. Then a knock shattered it, sharp, urgent, the kind that meant something was wrong. Draven's hands left her shoulders immediately. His entire posture shifted, became the king again. Enter. Kira burst through the door. Her face was pale, actually pale. The woman who'd faced down charging cavalry without flinching looked genuinely shaken. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Draven was already moving toward his weapons. What kind? Kira's eyes flicked to Seraphine, then back to the king. The kind that changes everything. Something cold slid down Seraphine's spine. She stood. Say it. Kira took a breath, like she was gathering courage for an execution. We received intelligence from our northern outposts. There's an army forming, approximately 5,000 strong, moving south toward Nocturne. Draven's jaw tightened. Who's leading it? That's the problem. Kira's voice went flat. Dead. It's not an external threat. It's internal. 3 of your most trusted noble houses, Vale, Tauren, Blackmere. They've allied. They're calling it a liberation force. The floor dropped out from under Seraphine's world. Vale. Her family name. The house she thought had died with her father. Her voice came distant, like it belonged to someone else. That's not possible. House Vale is finished. Everyone who mattered is dead or scattered. Not everyone. Kira pulled a sealed letter from inside her coat, extended it toward Seraphine with the care of someone handling a blade. This arrived an hour ago. It's addressed to you. Seraphine took it. Her hands didn't shake. That came later. The seal was crimson wax pressed with a signet she recognized from childhood. The Vale crest, the one her father used on official documents. She broke it open, read. The words hit like fists. Dearest Seraphine, by now you know that House Vale endures. Your father's death was unfortunate but necessary. He had grown weak, sentimental. He forgot that survival requires sacrifice. We do not. The Northern Alliance moves to restore the true order, to remove the tyrant who has poisoned you against your own blood, to bring you home where you belong. You have 3 days to renounce your false marriage and return to your family. If you refuse, we will take Nocturne by force and remind the Empire what happens when conquered houses remember their pride. Your loving uncle, Lord Marcus Vale. The letter fell from her fingers. Uncle Marcus, her father's younger brother, the man who'd vanished 5 years ago after a failed power play. Everyone assumed he'd died in exile. Apparently not. Draven picked up the letter. Read it with the cold efficiency of someone calculating how many would die. His voice came controlled, lethal. You have an uncle. Had. I thought he was dead. He's not, and apparently he spent 5 years building an alliance to take back what he thinks belongs to him. Seraphine felt something sharp and furious rising in her chest. What he thinks? We're talking about my family launching a war to kidnap me back into a house I chose to leave. Draven's eyes met hers. The question was there without words. Did you know? The accusation landed like a blade between ribs. Seraphine's voice came cold. No. I didn't know my uncle was alive. I didn't know anyone from House Vale survived. I sure as hell didn't know they were planning treason. Are you certain? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. And Seraphine understood with perfect clarity what was happening. Doubt. The poison that killed empires faster than armies. She stepped back. Put distance between them. Say it. Whatever you're thinking, say it to my face. Draven's jaw worked. You married me 3 months ago. Your father tried to burn my empire. Now your uncle launches a rebellion using your family name. You have to see how this looks. How it looks. Seraphine's voice rose. You think I'm part of this? You think I knew? I think coincidences don't exist in politics. The words hit harder than fists. Kira shifted uncomfortably. Your Majesty, get out! Draven's command was absolute. Kira left. Fast, leaving them alone in chambers that suddenly felt like interrogation rooms. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists. You're actually questioning my loyalty. After everything, after I helped you hunt down my own father, after I watched him executed, after I chose you over my entire bloodline. And maybe that was the plan all along. Sacrifice the father to position the daughter, gain my trust, wait for the real move. The accusation was so absurd it almost made her laugh. Almost. You're serious. You actually believe I've been playing you this entire time. Draven's face was stone. I believe people are capable of anything when survival is at stake. I believe families plan generations ahead. I believe I've seen this pattern before. What pattern? Beautiful woman. Tragic circumstances. Perfectly positioned to exploit weakness in a king stupid enough to think with his heart instead of his head. Seraphine felt something crack inside her chest, something that sounded like trust shattering. Her voice came quiet, deadly. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. I've had access to your food, your chambers, your throat while you slept. Don't insult me by pretending I needed a conspiracy. Then explain how your uncle knew exactly when to move, exactly how to position this to maximum damage. I can't, because I didn't know he existed. Convenient. Go to hell. She turned toward the door. Draven's voice stopped her. You're not leaving this fortress until we resolve this. The words landed like a prison sentence. Seraphine turned back slowly. Let him see the fury burning in her eyes. You're confining me, like a prisoner. I'm protecting the Empire. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. If you're not, he didn't finish, didn't need to. Seraphine looked at the man she'd chosen, the man she'd started to love, the man who was now looking at her like she was a threat instead of a partner, and she understood something that powerful people learn too late. Trust was the most fragile weapon in existence. One crack and the whole structure collapsed. Her voice came cold enough to freeze blood. Fine. Confine me. Post guards? Treat me like the enemy. But know this. When you realize you're wrong, when you figure out I had nothing to do with this, the apology better be spectacular. She walked out before he could respond. Behind her, she heard something crash, glass or pottery. Something breaking under the weight of rage and fear and the terrible uncertainty of not knowing who to trust. She didn't look back. Looking back was how you turned into salt and regret. Okub. The guards appeared outside her chambers within the hour. Not Draven's personal soldiers, strangers, men whose loyalty was unquestionable because they'd never met her before. Seraphine stood at the window and watched storm clouds gather over the mountains and tried not to feel like the walls were closing in. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Not the guards. Someone else. Come in. Kira entered. Her face was carefully neutral, the expression of someone walking a political tightrope. She closed the door, stood there for a moment like she was deciding something, then spoke. He's wrong. Seraphine didn't turn from the window. Doesn't matter. He's the king. What he believes becomes reality. He's also terrified. Of what? Me. Of losing you. Of being played. Of making the same mistake every king before him made by trusting the wrong person. That's not an excuse. No. Kira moved closer. But it's an explanation. You want to understand what's happening in his head right now. Seraphine finally turned, looked at the older woman with eyes that felt like they'd aged decades in hours. Tell me. Kira leaned against the wall, crossed her arms. 15 years ago, before Draven built this empire, he served another king. Good man, fair, believed in honor and trust and all the pretty words people use before they get killed. What happened? The king fell in love with a woman from a conquered territory. Beautiful, smart, everything he'd been taught to want. So he married her, made her queen, gave her power and position and access to everything. Let me guess. She betrayed him. Kira nodded. Sold military intelligence to enemy forces, coordinated an assassination attempt, nearly brought down the entire kingdom. When they finally caught her, she admitted it was planned from the beginning. Marry the conqueror, earn his trust, destroy him from within. And Draven was the king's bodyguard. He's the one who discovered the plot, the one who had to tell the king that the woman he loved was a weapon aimed at his throat. Jesus. The king refused to believe it, even with evidence. Even with her confession, love had made him stupid, so she killed him anyway. Poison in his wine. Draven was standing right there when it happened. Seraphine felt something cold settle in her stomach. So now he sees my uncle's rebellion and thinks history is repeating. Kira's scarred face showed something like sympathy. He sees the woman he's falling for positioned perfectly to exploit his weakness. Again. And his brain is screaming that he can't survive being that stupid twice. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. It's just brutal, and we do our best. Seraphine moved to the table, sat heavily in a chair that felt like a throne made of thorns. So what do I do? How do I prove I'm not her? Kira was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled something from inside her coat. A dagger, small, perfectly balanced. She set it on the table between them. You could run, tonight, before the siege starts. Take this blade and disappear. Draven would call it proof, would tell himself he was right, would harden into the thing he swore he'd never become. That's option 1. Seraphine stared at the blade. What's option 2? You could stay. Fight for the Empire that's trying to decide if you're a threat. Prove your loyalty not with words, but with action. And if Draven still doesn't believe me, then you'll have tried. And that's more than most people manage. Seraphine picked up the dagger, felt the weight of it. The promise of escape versus the cost of staying. She looked at Kira. Why are you helping me? The older woman's mouth curved slightly. Because I've been watching you for 3 months. Watching how you work yourself to exhaustion, trying to help people who don't trust you. Watching how you look at him when he's not paying attention. Watching how you carry guilt that isn't yours because you think it'll make you worthy. And that's not how traders operate. Traders are smooth, calculated. You're just a woman trying to survive in a world that keeps testing whether you deserve to. The honesty hit like absolution. Seraphine set the blade down. I'm staying. Kira nodded like she'd expected nothing less. Then you better prepare, because your uncle's army will be here in 2 days. And when that fight starts, everyone's going to be watching to see which side you're really on. She left as quietly as she'd come, leaving Seraphine alone with a dagger and a choice, and the terrible knowledge that sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to bleed for it. The War Council convened at midnight. Seraphine wasn't invited, but she went anyway. The guards tried to stop her. She looked at them with the cold fury of someone who'd decided dying was preferable to being treated like property. Move or bleed. Your choice. They moved. She walked into the strategy room where Draven and his generals stood around maps covered in troop positions and probable attack vectors. Every head turned. Draven's face went hard. You're confined to quarters, and you're about to make tactical decisions based on incomplete intelligence. So here I am. This is not your concern. Like hell it's not. That army is using my family name. Whether I want it or not, I'm part of this. So you can either benefit from what I know, or you can stumble blind into whatever my uncle planned. One of the generals stepped forward, the same young, ambitious one who'd questioned her before. With respect, Your Majesty, her presence represents a security risk, and Seraphine's eyes cut to him like razors. My uncle expects me to run, to hide, to prove I'm weak. Instead, I'm standing in a room full of people who think I'm a traitor, offering to help defend the empire he's trying to destroy. If that's not proof of whose side I'm on, then you're all too stupid to survive this. The general's face flushed. Draven's voice came cold. Everyone out, except her. The room emptied fast, leaving them alone with maps and accusations and the wreckage of what used to feel like trust. Draven braced his hands on the table. Didn't look at her. Why are you really here? Because running proves I'm guilty, and I'm not. Or because staying lets you feed intelligence to your uncle while pretending to help. The accusation should have hurt. By now it just felt tired. Seraphine moved to the map, studied the positions. My uncle is smart. Smarter than my father. He won't make the same mistakes. He won't rush, won't overcommit. He'll probe defenses. Look for weakness. Then strike where you're not expecting. How do you know? Because I watched him operate for 15 years before he disappeared. He taught me strategy the same way my father did. Ruthless, patient, always 3 moves ahead. She pointed to the map. You're fortifying the main gates, reinforcing the eastern approach. Standard defensive posture. It's sound strategy, it's predictable. He'll feint east, make you commit resources, then hit from the north where the cliffs make you feel safe. The north is inaccessible. Not if you have climbers, not if you spent 5 years preparing, not if you're willing to sacrifice the first wave just to establish a foothold. Draven finally looked at her. His eyes were gray stone. And how would you know that's his plan? Because it's what I would do. The honesty hung between them like a confession. Draven straightened, crossed his arms, the posture of a man building walls. So you're either helping me defend against your family, or you're telling me exactly what I want to hear while the real plan unfolds somewhere else. Seraphine felt fury rising like floodwater. You want proof? Fine. Send scouts to the northern approach, tonight. You'll find climbing equipment staged in the forest, ropes, pythons, everything needed to scale those cliffs. And if I don't, then I'm wrong and you can throw me in a cell with a clear conscience. But if I'm right, you better start reconsidering who the enemy actually is. Draven stared at her, searching for the lie. She stared back, unflinching. Finally, he moved to the door, barked an order to the guard outside. Send scouts to the northern cliffs. Full reconnaissance. Report back within 4 hours. Then he turned back to her. If you're lying, I'm not. If you're lying, the betrayal will be complete, and I will end you myself. The words should have been a threat. Instead, they sounded like heartbreak. Seraphine lifted her chin. If I'm lying, I'll deserve it. They stood in the war room with maps and accusations between them and waited for proof that would either save or destroy everything. Git. The scouts returned 3 hours later. Kira delivered the report personally. Her face was grim. She's right. Climbing gear staged at 3 points along the northern cliff base. Enough for 500 men. Fresh tracks. They were there within the last day. The room went silent. Every general was staring at Seraphine now, not with suspicion, with something closer to shock. Draven's face was unreadable. He looked at the map, then at her. What else? Seraphine stepped to the table. Let the fury she'd been holding back fuel her words. He'll send diplomats first, tomorrow morning, offering negotiations, promising to withdraw if I return peacefully. It's theater. He wants you distracted while his real forces get into position. How many waves? 3. First wave hits the North Cliffs at dawn the day after tomorrow. Suicide run. Just to draw your forces away from the main gates. Second wave comes from the east like you expected. Conventional assault. Hard and loud. And the third... She met Draven's eyes. The third comes from inside. The generals erupted. Impossible. We've vetted everyone. There's no way My uncle spent 5 years planning this. You think he didn't place people inside your fortress? Servants, guards, someone close enough to open gates or poison wells or assassinate key commanders when the moment's right. Draven's jaw clenched. Who? I don't know, but he'll activate them during the chaos, when you're too busy fighting external threats to watch internal ones. One of the older generals stepped forward. If what you're saying is true, we need to lock down the fortress immediately. Isolate anyone with Vale connections. No. Seraphine's voice cut through. That's what he wants, paranoia. Distrust. An empire eating itself while he walks through the ashes. Then what do you suggest? Draven's voice was controlled, but beneath it she heard the crack forming. You use me. Every eye in the room locked on her. Explain. I send word that I'm considering his offer, that I'm willing to negotiate. Keep him thinking I might actually defect. While his attention is on me, you fortify the real weak points and hunt for his inside people. That requires trusting you. The words landed like stones. Seraphine felt something inside her go very quiet. Very cold. Yes, it does. And I know that's hard for you. I know you've been burned before. I know you're terrified of being that stupid again. She moved around the table, stopped directly in front of him. But here's the thing about trust. It's a weapon. And like any weapon, refusing to use it because you're afraid makes you weaker, not stronger. Draven's hands clenched into fists. You're asking me to bet the entire empire on your word. No. I'm asking you to bet on the person you've watched work herself to exhaustion trying to help your people. The person who killed any chance of reconciliation with her family when she helped hunt down her father. The person standing here instead of running when running would be easier. What if you're wrong? Then we die together. But at least we'll die fighting instead of paralyzed by fear. The silence was absolute. Then Draven turned to his generals. Implement her strategy. Fortify the north. Watch the inside. And somebody find me the traitors before they activate. The generals dispersed immediately. leaving Draven and Seraphine alone in the war room with the weight of what just happened settling like ash. He didn't look at her, just stared at the map like it held answers instead of just terrain. His voice came quiet, broken. I want to trust you. More than anything, but every instinct I have is screaming that this is how I die. Seraphine felt tears pressing behind her eyes, refused to let them fall. I can't prove I'm not her. The woman who betrayed the last king you served. I can only show you who I am and hope it's enough. What if it's not? Then you'll have your answer, and I'll have mine. She turned toward the door, stopped. For what it's worth. I love you. Not the king, not the empire. You. The man who gives away supplies to refugees even when it's impractical, who carries the weight of every death like personal failure, who still somehow believes building something good is possible. She didn't wait for a response, just walked out and left him standing alone with his demons and the terrible choice between love and survival. Because some decisions couldn't be made with strategy. Only faith. And faith was the most dangerous weapon of all. The diplomats arrived exactly as Seraphine predicted, dawn the next morning, 3 riders under white flags, carrying terms written in her uncle's hand. Seraphine read them from the battlements while Draven stood close enough to touch, but might as well have been miles away. The terms were simple. She returns to House Vale. The army withdraws. No bloodshed necessary. The alternative was clearly implied. War, death, the empire drowning in violence. Draven's voice came flat. What do you want to do? Seraphine looked at the diplomats waiting below, then at the mountains where her uncle's forces were gathering like storm clouds. I want to send a response that makes my position crystal clear. Which is... She pulled the dagger Kira had given her, held it up so the morning light caught the blade. Then she drove it through the terms, pinned the parchment to the wooden railing, looked down at the diplomats. Her voice carried across the courtyard. Tell my uncle that House Vale died with my father. Tell him I'm Nocturne now. Tell him if he wants me, he can come take me himself. The diplomats stared up at her with the shock of people who'd expected negotiation and got war instead. They turned and rode hard for the mountains. Seraphine pulled the blade free. Let the ruined terms fall. Beside her, Draven's voice was barely a whisper. You just declared war on your own blood. She looked at him. Let him see the absolute certainty in her eyes. I declared loyalty. There's a difference. Why? Because empires are built by people who choose what they're fighting for. And I choose this. I choose you. I choose the impossible idea that maybe we can build something that doesn't rot from corruption or cruelty. Draven's facade finally cracked. His hand came up, cupped her face with the gentleness of someone holding something they were terrified of breaking. I don't deserve you. Nobody deserves anybody. We just choose each other and try not to destroy it. He kissed her then, desperate and honest and real. When they broke apart, his forehead pressed against hers. If we survive this, when we survive this, when we survive this, I'm never doubting you again. Yes, you will. You're human. Doubt comes with the crown. Then I'll fight it, every time. Seraphine smiled, felt something like hope burning in her chest despite everything. Good. Because the war just started. She was right. That night, the northern cliffs erupted with movement. 500 fighters climbing under cover of darkness, exactly as she'd predicted. But Draven's forces were waiting, archers positioned above, soldiers with pikes below. The suicide wave crashed against prepared defenses and broke. Bodies fell into darkness. Screams echoed off stone. The first assault failed, but it drew resources north exactly as intended. Because 3 hours later, the eastern gates shook under the impact of battering rams and siege engines that appeared out of nowhere. The second wave had begun, and somewhere inside the fortress, hidden among thousands of loyal servants and soldiers, Marcus Vale's inside people waited for their moment to strike. The game was entering its final phase, and standing on the battlements watching her uncle's forces try to tear down everything she'd chosen, Seraphine understood the final truth about power. It wasn't about strength or strategy or being smarter than your enemies. It was about deciding what you were willing to lose. And she'd already lost everything that came before. The only question now was whether she could keep what she'd found, or if trust, love, and hope were just pretty words people used before kingdoms burned. Below her, the siege engines roared. Above her, the sky turned red with fire. And inside her, something ancient and furious woke up and decided that losing wasn't an option anymore. Not today. Not ever. The war for Nocturne had begun, and Seraphine Vale was done being anyone's pawn. Time to become the queen this empire actually needed. Even if it meant becoming something she didn't recognize. Even if it meant crossing lines she'd sworn never to touch. Even if it meant losing the last pieces of who she used to be. Because survival required transformation. And she was about to discover exactly what she was capable of when everything she loved was on the line. The siege engines hammered against the eastern gates like the fists of dying gods. Each impact sent shockwaves through stone that had stood for centuries. Dust rained from the ceiling of the war room where Draven coordinated defenses with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this too many times to count. Seraphine stood at the window watching fire arc across the night sky. Watched it land. Watched sections of the outer district ignite like kindling soaked in oil and desperation. People were dying out there. Civilians caught between her uncle's ambition and the Empire's survival. Men and women and children who'd never asked to be part of this war, but were burning anyway because that's how power operates. It consumes everything in its radius without discrimination or mercy. She felt each death like a brand against her soul. Behind her, generals barked orders that sounded increasingly desperate. Runners came and went with casualty reports that kept climbing. The numbers blurred together into one screaming truth that nobody wanted to acknowledge. They were losing ground, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow inevitability of water wearing down stone. Another hour, another breach, another section of wall that wouldn't hold. Kira appeared at her elbow, blood on her armor that definitely wasn't hers, soot on her face like war paint. She'd been fighting on the walls for 6 hours straight without rest or complaint. Her voice came rough. Eastern gate is holding, barely. Northern approach is secure. But we're stretched so thin a strong wind could break us. If they hit anywhere else, they will. Seraphine's voice came flat, empty of everything except tactical reality. That's the entire plan. Grind us down position by position until there's nothing left to defend. Draven crossed the room in 3 strides. His armor was dented in places that suggested close calls, fresh blood on his gauntlets. Not his own. Never his own. The man seemed to collect other people's blood like some men collected medals. We need to force a confrontation. End this before the fortress falls piece by piece and we're buried in the rubble of our own walls. How? Kira's question was genuine. We're outnumbered 2-1. Our soldiers are exhausted. Resources are depleted. What exactly are we supposed to force them into? Seraphine turned from the window, met Draven's eyes with the cold clarity of someone who'd already made an impossible decision and was just waiting for the right moment to announce it. You give them what they want. Draven's expression went very still, very dangerous. The way stone looks right before it cracks under pressure. Explain. Me. You offer a trade. I surrender myself in exchange for withdrawal. My uncle agrees because that's literally what he came for. His forces lower their guard thinking they've won, and we hit them with everything we have left. The room went silent. Even the distant sounds of battle seemed to pause, like the universe itself was holding its breath waiting to see how this played out. Draven's voice came quiet. Too quiet. The tone that preceded violence. Absolutely not. It's the only move that makes tactical sense. I said no. The words cracked through the room like a whip across bare skin. Every head turned. Every general suddenly found the maps on the table fascinating. Nobody wanted to be present for what was clearly about to become a very personal argument dressed in strategic language. Seraphine felt her jaw tighten, felt fury and frustration rising like floodwater behind a failing dam. This isn't a request. It's strategy. It's the only card we have left to play. It's suicide. You walk out there and he kills you immediately. Or worse, he keeps you alive as leverage while he continues the siege anyway. I lose you and gain absolutely nothing except the knowledge that I was stupid enough to let it happen. Maybe. Or maybe he actually withdraws because he gets exactly what he wants. His niece. The Vale bloodline. The legitimacy he needs to rebuild the house. And you trust him to keep his word. No. But I trust that he values me alive more than dead. I'm not just a person to him. I'm a symbol. I'm leverage. I'm the future of House Vale in his diseased mind. Dead, I'm worthless. Alive, I'm everything he's been planning for. Draven moved closer, each step deliberate. His voice dropped to something dangerous and desperate and breaking. You think I'm going to stand here and watch you sacrifice yourself for an empire you didn't even ask to join? An empire that's done nothing but test you and doubt you and demand proof of loyalty. I'm not asking your permission. The hell you're not. The air between them crackled with fury and fear, and something that looked suspiciously like love wrapped in barbed wire and soaked in gasoline. Kira cleared her throat. Tried for diplomacy. Your Majesties, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Get out. Both of them said it simultaneously. Same tone, same absolute certainty. The room emptied in seconds. Generals and advisors fleeing like the walls were already collapsing, leaving them alone with battle sounds echoing through stone, and the weight of impossible choices crushing down like gravity itself had personal grievances. Draven's hands came up, gripped her shoulders. Not gentle, desperate. The grip of someone holding on to the last good thing in their life. I can't lose you. Not like this. Not after everything we've survived. Not when I just figured out how to trust someone again. You won't lose me. You'll win. There's a fundamental difference. You don't know that. You're gambling on the mercy of a man who beat an old woman and burned villages. That's not strategy. That's hope. And hope gets people killed. Then what's your alternative? We sit here and wait for the walls to fall. Watch everyone die slowly instead of quickly. At least this way some of us survive. His forehead dropped against hers. His breath came ragged like he'd been running for miles. There has to be another way. There's always another way. We just haven't found it yet. We've been looking for 6 hours. The other way doesn't exist. This is all we have. She pulled back enough to make him look at her, made him see the absolute certainty in her eyes. You taught me that crowns are wounds that never close, that power requires sacrifice, that survival means making decisions that leave scars you carry forever. You taught me all of that, so don't act surprised when I actually learned the lesson. I didn't mean you. The sacrifice was never supposed to be you, but it is me. Because I'm the queen now, whether I wanted it or not, whether I'm ready or not. And queens protect their people even when it costs everything they have left to give. Draven's eyes were wet. Actually wet. She'd seen him covered in blood, seen him exhausted beyond measure, seen him furious and calculating and coldly efficient. She'd never seen him cry. I love you. The words came raw, stripped of everything except truth. No strategy, no calculation, just honesty bleeding out in the open. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can. You did it for years before I showed up and complicated everything. That's not the same and you know it. You changed everything. You made me believe building something good was actually possible, instead of just a fantasy weak rulers tell themselves. Made me think love wasn't just weakness waiting to be exploited by anyone smart enough to see it. It's not weakness. But sometimes love means letting go, so the other person can do what needs doing, even when it destroys you to watch. She kissed him, fierce and desperate and final. Poured everything she couldn't say into the contact, every fear, every hope, every prayer to God she didn't believe in that this would somehow work. When she pulled away, his hands were shaking. The conqueror, the legend, the king who'd built an empire through pure will. Shaking. If you die out there, his voice cracked. If he kills you, I will burn the world down. Every kingdom, every house, every person who stood by and watched. I will make the history books remember what happens when you take things from me. Then you'll have your answer about whether I was worth loving. Don't. His grip tightened. Don't talk like you're already gone. I'm not gone. I'm right here. But I need you to understand this is my choice. Mine. Not yours. Not the Empire's. Mine. I'm the one deciding. So own your choices, but don't take mine away. She stepped back, started removing the light armor she'd been wearing. Draven watched with the expression of someone watching their world end in real time. Each buckle she undid felt like another nail in a coffin he was building in his mind. What are you doing? Getting ready. If I'm going to surrender, I need to look like someone worth trading for. Can't walk out there looking like a soldier. Need to look like a queen. This is insane. Probably. But insane is all we have left when sanity already failed. She pulled on a dress from the wardrobe. Simple. Dark as midnight. The kind of thing you wear when you're ready to meet death and refuse to give it the satisfaction of seeing you weak. Draven watched every movement like he was memorizing it, storing it away for the long nights after she was gone. When she was ready, she turned back to him, straightened her shoulders, became the thing her bloodline demanded. A queen. Give me 2 hours after I'm outside those gates. If the attack doesn't stop, assume he killed me and do whatever it takes to win. Burn their camps, salt the earth. Whatever it takes. And if he doesn't kill you, if this actually works, then I'll figure out how to survive until you can extract me. I'm good at surviving, you taught me that too. Draven's laugh came broken, shattered into pieces that didn't fit back together. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. I walk out, you wait. We see what breaks first, him or us. His hand caught hers, held on like a drowning man grabbing driftwood in a storm. I should have trusted you. From the very beginning, should have believed you when you said you chose this, chose me, chose the Empire. Should have known you weren't her. You're human. Doubt comes with the crown, with the scars, with every betrayal you've survived. I'm sorry for questioning your loyalty over and over, for making you prove yourself when you'd already bled for us, for being too damaged and broken to just accept that someone could actually love me without ulterior motives. Seraphine's throat tightened, felt tears threatening, and pushed them down with pure will. Stop! You'll make me change my mind. Don't. His grip tightened until it hurt. Don't change your mind. Go. Do this impossible thing. Save us all. Then come back so I can spend the rest of my life making this up to you. She pulled her hand free, because holding on any longer would shatter the resolve she'd built from fear and fury and love. Win this war. That's how you make it up to me. Then she walked toward the door before courage could abandon her like everyone else. At the threshold, Draven's voice stopped her one last time. Seraphine. She paused. Didn't turn around, didn't trust herself to look at him. If this goes wrong, if you don't come back, I need you to know you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid and scared to say it enough while I had the chance. She closed her eyes, let the words settle into her bones like foundations for something that might not get built, then opened them and walked out without responding. Because some truths were too heavy to carry into battle. Some words made you weak when you needed to be steel. Gig. The white flag went up at midnight. Seraphine walked out the main gates alone. No armor, no weapons, no guards. Just a woman in a dark dress walking toward an army that wanted her dead or captured or broken. Each step felt like walking off a cliff in slow motion. The siege stopped. Catapults went silent. Battering rams stilled. Even the screaming seemed to pause, like the entire world was holding its breath to see what happened next. House Vale's forces parted like water around a stone dropped into still depths. And through the gap came her uncle. She hadn't seen him in 5 years, not since he'd vanished after trying to overthrow her father in a power play that failed spectacularly. Everyone assumed he'd died in exile, executed by one of the kingdoms he'd fled to. Apparently not. He looked older, harder. Gray streaked through his beard that had been dark before, lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent planning revenge instead of living. But his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, missing nothing. The eyes of a man who saw people as pieces on a board instead of actual human beings. He stopped 10 feet away, studied her like she was a problem to solve, an equation with variables he hadn't quite identified, then smiled. The expression didn't reach his eyes. Never did. Seraphine, you look well. Queenship agrees with you. Much better than that fortress prison you were raised in. Her voice came flat, empty of inflection. What do you want, Marcus? The same thing I've always wanted, to restore our house to its rightful place, to undo the damage your father did through weakness and sentiment and pathetic attempts at honor, by burning territories and killing civilians and besieging fortresses, by removing the tyrant who's poisoned half the kingdom against us, who's turned you into something you were never meant to be. Draven's not a tyrant, he's just smarter than you, and that terrifies you. Marcus's smile didn't falter. Maybe. But he made a fatal mistake. He trusted you, brought you into his inner circle, gave you access to everything. Military plans, weaknesses, the location of every crack in his armor. I didn't betray him. Not yet. But you will. When you understand what I'm really offering. She felt cold sliding down her spine like ice water. Felt the trap closing even though she couldn't see all the pieces yet. What? Marcus gestured and soldiers dragged forward a figure in chains. Seraphine's breath stopped in her throat. Margaret. The old woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her how to think and when to fight and why kindness wasn't the same as weakness. Who'd given her wisdom and warmth when everything else was collapsing. She was alive. Barely. Beaten. Bleeding. Her face was a mass of bruises. One eye swollen shut, but alive. Marcus's voice came smooth as poison honey. I found her hiding in the ruins of your old estate. Thought she might be useful leverage. Turns out I was right. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. If you hurt her any more than you already have, you'll what? Marcus moved closer, close enough that she could smell wine on his breath, see the madness lurking behind the calculation in his eyes. You're unarmed, surrounded by my forces, completely at my mercy. So tell me, what exactly will you do? He was right, and they both knew it. Out here, she had no power, no leverage, nothing except whatever value he placed on keeping her alive. Here's my offer. His voice dropped to something almost gentle, almost reasonable. Come with me. Renounce your marriage to the tyrant. Stand beside me as we rebuild House Vale into what it should have been before your father's weakness destroyed it. In exchange, the old woman lives. Draven lives. His empire survives to fight another day. And if I refuse, then I kill her in front of you, slowly. Then I kill everyone in that fortress, every soldier, every servant, every child hiding in the cellars. Then I salt the earth where Nocturne stood and make sure history forgets it ever existed. Seraphine looked at Margaret's bruised face, saw the old woman shake her head slightly despite the pain it must have caused, mouthing words through broken lips. Don't. Run. But running wasn't an option anymore. Because Seraphine understood something her uncle didn't. Something powerful people always miss because they're too busy calculating advantages to see the truth. Power wasn't about making threats. It was about deciding what you were willing to sacrifice. And she'd already made that choice back in the war room when she kissed Draven goodbye and walked out, knowing she might not return. Her voice came cold and clear, cutting through the night like a blade through flesh. No. Marcus blinked, actually looked confused for the first time. What? I said no. I'm not going with you. I'm not renouncing anything. I'm Nocturne's queen, and you can go straight to hell. The smile fell off his face like a mask hitting stone. You're bluffing, trying to negotiate better terms. I'm really not. This is my final answer. Do whatever you're going to do. Kill Margaret. Kill me. Kill everyone you want. But know this. Every death you cause tonight proves you're exactly what Draven says you are. A desperate old man clinging to power that was never yours to begin with. Marcus's hand went to his sword. His voice shook with rage, barely contained. You'd let her die. The woman who raised you, who loved you when your own father was too busy gambling away the family fortune. Yes. Why? Because she taught me that some things matter more than survival. That dying with honor beats living as a coward. That choosing what you stand for is the only real power anyone has. She met his eyes. Let him see the absolute certainty there. The complete absence of doubt or fear. So do it. Kill her. Kill me. Prove that violence is all you understand. Prove that House Vale deserved to fall because it was led by men who confused cruelty with strength. Marcus's face went purple, veins standing out on his forehead. You little... His sword came up fast. Seraphine didn't flinch, didn't close her eyes, just stood there watching death approach with the calm of someone who'd already made peace with it. The blade stopped an inch from her throat. Because behind Marcus, something was happening. Fire. Massive and sudden and spreading fast. Erupting from inside his own camp like hell had opened a door and decided to visit. Explosions tearing through supply wagons. Tents collapsing in flames. Soldiers screaming as stockpiled oil ignited and spread. Marcus spun around. What in the name of... Kira's voice cut through the chaos, rough and gleeful and absolutely delighted. Surprise, motherfucker. She stepped out of the darkness with 50 fighters at her back, all wearing Marcus's colors, all dressed as his people. Except they weren't. They were Dravens, planted over weeks, sleeper agents waiting for the exact moment when all attention shifted to Seraphine and the distraction was complete. Kira's blade found Marcus's throat before he could even process what was happening. Her grin was vicious, sharp as broken glass. You really thought we'd let her walk out here alone? That's adorable. Stupid, but adorable. The camp erupted into complete chaos. Marcus's forces turned on each other as more sleeper agents activated throughout the ranks. Friend couldn't be distinguished from enemy. Orders dissolved into screaming, and through it all, through the smoke and fire and confusion, Draven appeared on horseback leading the full force of Noctarin's cavalry. His voice boomed across the battlefield like thunder announcing the apocalypse. For the Queen, for the Empire, end this. The charge hit Marcus's disorganized forces like a hammer on glass. Everything shattered. Seraphine grabbed Margaret, pulled the old woman away from the fighting with strength she didn't know she had. Margaret was crying and laughing simultaneously. You stupid girl! I told you to run! Since when do I listen to advice? Margaret's broken laugh turned into a cough that sounded wet and wrong. Since never. Not once in your stubborn life. Seraphine held her while battle raged around them in a symphony of steel and screaming. Watched Draven cut through enemies with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this since he was old enough to lift a blade. Watched Kira fight like she was personally offended by Marcus's existence. Watched an army collapse when its leader's arrogance finally outpaced his intelligence. Marcus tried to rally, tried to mount some kind of defense, but it was already over. He'd lost the moment he believed his own legend, believed that Seraphine would break, that love made people weak instead of dangerous. Draven's forces surrounded him, cut off every escape route, dismantled his command structure with surgical precision born from years of doing exactly this. Within an hour, the rebellion was finished. Marcus knelt in mud with his hands bound and his army scattered or captured or dead. Draven dismounted, walked through corpses and smoke and the wreckage of shattered ambitions until he reached Seraphine. His eyes searched hers, checking for damage, for breaks, for anything that said she wasn't okay. You good. Define good. Alive. Unbroken. Still making terrible decisions that somehow work out. Then yeah, I'm good. He pulled her against him, armor and all, held her like he was confirming she was real and not some ghost his desperate mind had conjured. Don't ever do that again. Can't promise that. Seraphine? Fine. I'll try not to do that again. Better. His laugh came shaky, barely contained, marginally. Behind them, soldiers secured prisoners and tended wounded. The battle was over, but the work of cleaning up never ended. Kira appeared, blood-soaked and grinning like she'd just had the time of her life. What do we do with him? She jerked her head toward Marcus. Draven looked at Seraphine. This is your call, your family, your choice. She studied her uncle, the man who'd orchestrated all of this, who'd beaten Margaret and threatened her people and tried to use love as a weapon against those who dared to feel it. The old Seraphine would have wanted mercy, would have argued for trials and process and fairness. The queen just felt tired and certain. She moved to where Marcus knelt, looked down at him with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, just cold assessment. His eyes held hers, still defiant even in defeat, still believing he was somehow right. You think you've won, but you haven't. You're still just a pawn in someone else's game, still just a girl playing dress-up in a crown that doesn't fit. Maybe. Seraphine's voice came quiet, deadly. Or maybe I'm the thing your generation never understood. Someone willing to change, to adapt, to become whatever's necessary to protect what actually matters. Marcus spat blood. You're weak, just like your father, just like everyone who thinks compassion is strength. No. She crouched down, got level with him so he could see her face clearly. I'm ruthless. There's a fundamental difference. My father was weak because he couldn't admit when he was wrong. You're weak because you can't imagine a world where you're not in control, where women aren't possessions, where power serves something beyond ego. She stood, looked at Draven. Trial. Public. Transparent. Let the people see exactly what happens to those who choose personal ambition over the Empire's survival. Draven nodded. Take him to the dungeons, maximum security, no visitors until the trial. Soldiers hauled Marcus away. He was still shouting threats as they disappeared into the fortress, still promising that she'd regret this, that karma would find her, that betraying blood always came back around. She watched him go and felt nothing. That was new. 3 months ago, watching family get dragged to cells would have destroyed something inside her, would have felt like losing part of herself. Now it just felt like closing a chapter in a book she was done reading. Margaret's hand found hers, squeezed with surprising strength for someone so battered. You did good, child. I let you get hurt. I'm old. I've been hurt before. I'll heal what you did tonight. Standing up when he thought you'd break. That's what matters. That's what queenship actually looks like. Seraphine looked at the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her that kindness wasn't weakness and strength came in forms that didn't always involve swords or crowns. Thank you for everything, for surviving this, for believing I was worth saving all those years ago. Margaret's weathered face creased into a smile. You were never the one who needed saving. You were always the one who'd do the saving. I just helped you see it. Medical teams took Margaret away to treat injuries that looked worse than they probably were, leaving Seraphine standing in the aftermath with Draven's hand in hers and the fortress still burning in places, but standing. Standing. They'd survived, barely, by the skin of their teeth and the grace of good planning and a little bit of luck, but survival counted. Draven's voice came quiet. You scared the hell out of me tonight. Good. Keeps you sharp. I'm serious. Watching you walk out there knowing I might lose you, that was worse than any battle I've ever fought, worse than any wound I've ever taken. She turned, looked up at him, saw the exhaustion, the fear, the love. But you trusted me anyway. You trusted the plan even when every instinct you had was screaming to pull me back. That's what love looks like when it's real instead of possessive. His hand cupped her face, gentle despite the calluses and scars. I trusted you because I love you, and love means believing in someone even when fear is screaming the opposite. Means letting them walk into danger because keeping them safe means taking away their choices. Seraphine felt tears finally breaking through the walls she'd built to survive the night. I love you too, not the king, not the legend, not the empire, just you. The man who showed me that power and compassion aren't mutually exclusive. That strength means knowing when to be gentle. They kissed surrounded by smoke and corpses and the wreckage of a battle that nearly destroyed everything. And it felt like coming home after being lost for years. When they broke apart, Kira was standing nearby, trying very hard to look like she hadn't been watching the whole thing. She cleared her throat. Loudly. Hate to interrupt the moment. Really do. But we've got a situation developing. What now? Draven's voice held the exhaustion of someone who'd fought 3 battles in one night and wasn't sure he had another in him. The northern watchtowers are reporting movement. Different army. Bigger than Marcus's force. Coming down from the mountains. Seraphine's blood went cold. Every nerve in her body suddenly alert. Who? Kira's face was grim. Banner matches descriptions we've heard. The Iron Sovereign. The warlord who's been uniting the northern wolf clans for the past 2 years. Draven swore, creatively, with feeling, several languages. Seraphine felt the bottom drop out of her world. They're taking advantage of us being weakened. Classic opportunistic strike. Kira nodded. We're battered. Resources depleted, defenses damaged. It's the perfect time to hit an enemy when they can't adequately respond. How long until they arrive? Dawn. Maybe 6 hours if we're lucky, 4 if we're not. Draven ran a hand through his hair, left blood streaks he didn't notice. We can't fight another siege, not this soon, not with the forces we have left. Half our soldiers are wounded. Ammunition's depleted. The walls are damaged. Then we negotiate. Seraphine's voice came firm despite the fear. We buy time, regroup, call in whatever allies we still have, find a way to survive until we can actually fight. And if they won't negotiate, if they're here for conquest regardless of cost, then we fight anyway. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with, and then we fight with our bare hands. Draven looked at her. something complicated moving through his expression: pride, fear, love, exhaustion. 3 months ago, you were a daughter being sold to survive your family's collapse. Now you're a queen planning military strategy against warlords and talking about fighting to the last breath. 3 months ago, I thought survival was the hardest thing I'd ever face. Now I know better. What's harder? Choosing what you're willing to die for, and making absolutely sure it's worth the cost before you commit. Kira made a noise that might have been approval or might have been exhaustion. Hard to tell. I'll prepare whatever defenses we can manage, such as they are. She left to organize the impossible. Seraphine and Draven stood in the courtyard watching the eastern sky slowly lighten with the promise of dawn and another battle they weren't ready for. Another impossible choice. Another chance to lose everything they'd fought to build. Draven's arm came around her shoulders, pulled her close. We're gonna die doing this. Eventually. If not today, then someday soon. Probably. The odds aren't exactly in our favor. Worth it. She leaned into him, felt the solid reality of him against her, muscle and bone and scars and everything that made him real instead of legend. Ask me again when we're not covered in blood and facing certain death. His laugh came quiet, broken but real. So never. Pretty much. They stood there while around them soldiers worked frantically to shore up defenses that might not hold, while medics tended wounded who might not survive the night, while the Empire balanced on the edge of total collapse. And Seraphine understood the final truth about power that nobody tells you when you're young and stupid and think crowns are rewards instead of burdens. It's not about winning every battle. It's not about being the strongest or the smartest or the most ruthless. It's about how you fight when losing seems inevitable, who you become in the process of trying, what you refuse to sacrifice even when sacrifice appears to be the only option. She'd walked into hell tonight and come back still holding on to everything that actually mattered: her integrity, her love, her choice, her humanity. That was victory even if nobody else saw it that way. Even if the history books never recorded it. Even if they died tomorrow and the Empire fell and everything they'd built turned to ash. They'd stood for something real. That had to count for something in the grand scheme of things. Draven's voice interrupted her thoughts. What are you thinking about? Seraphine smiled, tired but genuine. That win or lose, I'm glad I chose you. Glad I chose this life. Glad I became someone who fights for things instead of just surviving them. His kiss was gentle this time, reverent, like she was something precious instead of just another soldier. When he pulled back, his eyes held something that looked almost like peace. Whatever comes at dawn, whatever army, whatever impossible odds, we face it together. Together. She agreed. No other way I'd want to do this. Behind them, the fortress prepared for war, it wasn't ready to fight. Above them, stars faded as morning approached with indifferent certainty. And in the mountains, an army marched toward Nocturne, carrying the promise of violence and the certainty that empires built on blood eventually drowned in it. But Seraphine and Draven stood in the pre-dawn darkness holding each other like lifelines. Two people who'd found something worth defending in a world specifically designed to destroy anything good. Two rulers who understood that crowns were wounds that never fully healed but chose to wear them anyway. Two souls who'd been broken and rebuilt and broken again and still somehow believed that building was possible, that love was real. That hope wasn't just a lie weak people told themselves. The Iron Sovereign was coming with an army that outnumbered them in resources they couldn't match. War was inevitable. Death was probable. Survival was unlikely. But they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else since the moment she'd walked through those gates 3 months ago, together, standing side by side, refusing to surrender what mattered, even when surrender seemed like the only rational choice. And maybe that was enough. Maybe love and loyalty and the stubborn refusal to break were the only weapons that actually mattered when everything else failed. Maybe survival wasn't about lasting forever, just about lasting long enough to make the fight meaningful. The sun broke over the mountains like a wound opening in the sky, and with it came the sound of war drums echoing through valleys, deep, rhythmic, ancient, the heartbeat of something that had been killing since before kingdoms had names. The final battle was approaching, the one they might not survive. And Seraphine Vale looked at the army appearing on the horizon like a dark tide and felt something fierce and terrible and absolutely unbreakable burning in her chest. Not fear, not anymore. Just the cold certainty of someone who'd lost everything once and refused with every fiber of her being to let it happen again. She turned to Draven, met his eyes. Whatever happens next, whatever it costs us, whatever we have to become, we hold. His hand found hers, squeezed hard enough to hurt, hard enough to ground them both. We hold. And together they walked toward the gates to meet their fate, with their eyes open and their choices made, and their love burning like a beacon in the gathering darkness. The Iron Sovereign's army crested the northern ridge as dawn broke like a wound across the sky. Seraphine stood on the battlements watching them come. 5,000 warriors moving with the coordinated precision of wolves who'd hunted together for years. Their banners were black and silver. No crests, no noble houses, just the raw symbol of unified clans who'd decided that survival meant conquering everything in their path. At their center rode a figure that made the morning air feel colder. The Iron Sovereign herself, not a king, a queen. That detail hit Seraphine like a fist to the sternum. She'd been expecting another warlord drunk on testosterone and ambition. Another Marcus, or worse. Instead, approaching Nocturne's damaged gates was a woman who'd done exactly what Seraphine was trying to do. United fractured territories through pure force of will. The difference was method. The Sovereign had chosen fear where Draven chose order, had chosen domination where Seraphine was desperately trying to build something that lasted beyond violence. Draven appeared beside her. His armor was fresh, but his face showed the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting for 18 hours straight. Blood still crusted under his fingernails despite washing. Kira's intelligence was right. That's her. The woman who united 12 wolf clans by killing every leader who opposed her and adopting their children as her own. That's horrifying. That's effective. Draven's voice held grudging respect. The children grow up loyal to her instead of seeking revenge. She breaks the cycle of vendetta by making herself the new matriarch. So she's smart, dangerously. And she's here, which means she sees opportunity in our weakness. Then we better not look weak. Seraphine straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, became the thing the Empire needed even though her body was screaming for sleep and her mind was still processing the battle they'd barely survived. The Sovereign's forces stopped just outside arrow range. Disciplined, patient, no rushing, no posturing, just cold calculation about whether this fortress was worth the casualties it would cost to take. A single rider broke from their ranks, carrying a white flag and a scroll sealed with black wax. Draven gestured, and the gates opened just enough to let the messenger approach. The rider was young, maybe 16, but his eyes held the flat affect of someone who'd seen too much death too early. He handed the scroll to the gate captain and rode back without speaking a single word. The captain brought it to Draven. He broke the seal. Read. His expression went carefully neutral, in the way that meant the contents were worse than expected. He handed it to Seraphine without comment. She read. The terms were simple and brutal in their clarity. Surrender. Nocturne keep intact. Draven Kael submits to public execution for crimes against the Northern Territories. All military commanders tried and sentenced. The remaining population integrated into sovereign territory under her law. In exchange, civilian casualties would be minimal. The city would be absorbed rather than destroyed. Children would be spared and educated. The Empire would continue under new management. Refuse and the Sovereign would take the fortress by force. No quarter given. No prisoners taken. Every man, woman, and child put to the sword as an example to other territories considering resistance. They had until sunset to decide. Seraphine handed the scroll back to Draven. Her voice came hollow. She wants you dead and the Empire absorbed. Standard conquest terms. Draven's tone was almost conversational, like they were discussing weather instead of his execution. Remove the leadership, integrate the territory, eliminate resistance by making survival conditional on cooperation. You're taking this remarkably calmly. I've had worse offers. At least she's honest about it. Seraphine felt something sharp and furious rising in her chest. You're not actually considering this. No. But I appreciate the tactical clarity. She's not pretending this is liberation or justice. It's just conquest. There's a purity to that. Draven. He turned and looked at her fully. His gray eyes were tired but clear. We can't win this fight. You know that. I know that. Every soldier on these walls knows that. We're outnumbered, out-resourced. Our defenses are damaged and our people are exhausted. If they attack, we'll hold for maybe 6 hours before the walls fall. So what? We just give up. Hand you over to be executed in a public square while I watch everything we built get absorbed by someone who rules through fear. No. We negotiate. With what leverage? She has all the advantages. She has numbers. We have legitimacy. There's a difference. Seraphine stared at him, trying to understand where this was going. Draven turned back to look at the army arrayed against them. When he spoke, his voice carried something that sounded almost like hope. The Sovereign united the wolf clans through strength and adoption, but she's never faced unified opposition from an established empire. If she takes Nocturne by force, she gets a fortress and a population that will resist her for generations. If she negotiates, she gets something more valuable. What? A partner. The word hung in the cold morning air like a blade waiting to drop. Seraphine felt her mind racing through implications. You want to ally with her? I want to survive. And surviving means recognizing when you're beaten and finding a third option that's not surrender or death. What kind of alliance? The kind where we acknowledge she controls the northern territories and we control the south. Where we establish trade routes and mutual defense pacts instead of bleeding each other dry over borders. Where two rulers who understand power actually work together instead of destroying everything trying to prove who's stronger. That's insane. That's politics. War is what happens when politics fails. Let's try not failing. Before Seraphine could respond, Kira appeared. Her face was grim in a new way, the expression of someone delivering news that changed everything. Your Majesties, we have a development. Now what? The prisoners. Marcus's remaining forces. They're asking to speak with you, specifically with the Queen. Why? They say they have information about the Sovereign's army, weaknesses we can exploit. Draven's eyes narrowed. What do they want in exchange? Clemency. Reduce sentences. Integration into Nocturne forces rather than execution. It's a trap. Maybe. Kira's scarred face showed uncertainty. But they seem genuine. Desperate men make strange allies. Seraphine looked at Draven. We should at least hear what they have to say. You trust them? No. But I trust that survival makes people pragmatic. They'd rather fight with us than die with Marcus. Draven was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Bring their representative. War room. 5 minutes. Kira disappeared, leaving Seraphine and Draven standing on battlements watching an army that could destroy them and trying to find a path between annihilation and surrender. Some choices felt impossible until you stopped looking for good options and started looking for survivable ones. The prisoner they brought was a captain, maybe 30 years old with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years fighting other people's wars. His hands were bound, but his posture was straight, defiant even in defeat. Draven sat at the head of the strategy table. Seraphine stood beside him. United front, equal partners. The captain's eyes flicked between them, assessing, calculating whether this was worth the risk. Talk! Draven's voice was flat. You have 2 minutes to convince me you're not wasting time we don't have. The captain took a breath. The Sovereign's army, they're strong, but they have a weakness. Supply lines. They moved fast to get here, which means they're carrying limited provisions. They're betting on a quick siege, overwhelming force, fast victory. That's not a weakness. That's standard operating procedure. It is if you can hold longer than they expect. If you force them into an extended siege, they'll start running out of food and water. Their discipline will fracture. The wolf clans are unified now, but that's a fragile alliance built on success. Start costing them casualties without progress, and the cracks will show. Seraphine leaned forward. How long can they sustain a siege? 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if they ration. After that, they'll have to either retreat to resupply or commit to a desperate assault that will cost them more than they want to pay. And you know this how? Because I fought with some of those clans before Marcus recruited me. I know how they operate. They're raiders, not besiegers. They hit hard and fast. Extended campaigns make them anxious. Draven's fingers drummed on the table. What else? The Sovereign. She's brilliant tactically, but she has a blind spot. Pride. She's never lost a major engagement, never been forced to negotiate from anything but absolute strength. If you can make this costly enough, she'll consider terms rather than risk her first significant defeat. So your advice is hold out and hope she gets impatient. My advice is make her believe taking this fortress will cost more than it's worth. Make her see negotiation as the smart play instead of the weak one. The captain's eyes met Seraphine's directly. You walked into an enemy camp unarmed and survived by refusing to break. Do the same thing here. Show her you'd rather die than surrender. She'll respect that. Might even negotiate with someone who has that kind of spine. Seraphine felt something clicking into place, a strategy forming from desperation and insight. She looked at Draven. What if we combine both approaches? We prepare for extended defense, shore up supplies, make it clear we're willing to bleed them for every inch. But we also send an envoy, open negotiations before the fighting starts. Draven's expression was thoughtful. Show strength and willingness to talk simultaneously. Exactly. We're not surrendering. We're offering an alternative to mutual destruction. Kira spoke from the corner. Who goes as envoy? Can't be you. She'd see that as weakness. Can't be Draven. Too valuable as a target. It should be me. Seraphine's voice was quiet, but certain. I'm the queen. I'm the one who negotiated with Marcus. I'm the one who understands what it means to rule without the safety of inherited power. Absolutely not. Draven's response was immediate. You just walked into one hostile camp. I'm not sending you into another. This is different. The Sovereign isn't Marcus. She's not driven by family vendetta. She's driven by calculation. If I can show her that negotiation serves her interests better than siege, she'll consider it. And if you're wrong, then I'll die. But we're all dying anyway if we just sit here waiting for her to attack. At least this way, we're trying something. The room went silent. Even the distant sounds of soldiers preparing defenses seemed to fade. Draven looked at her with eyes that held exhaustion and love, and the terrible weight of too many impossible decisions. I can't keep watching you walk into danger. Then don't watch. Trust that I know what I'm doing. His jaw clenched. You're asking me to gamble everything on the hope that a warlord who built an empire through violence will suddenly discover diplomacy. No. I'm asking you to let me try saving us all before we commit to dying together. The captain cleared his throat. For what it's worth, the Sovereign values courage. If someone walks into her camp and speaks truth without flinching, she'll at least listen. Might not agree, but she'll listen. Draven's hands pressed flat against the table, white-knuckled. Then Seraphine did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She removed her crown, the circlet of dark metal that marked her as queen, set it on the table between them. Her voice was steady. I'm going whether you approve or not. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can either support me or watch me do it alone. But I'm done sitting in fortresses while the world burns outside. Draven stared at the crown, then at her. Something shifted in his expression. Some final wall crumbling. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He wasn't bothering to hide anymore. You're the most terrifying person I've ever met. Good. Terrifying gets things done. If you die out there, then you burn her army to ash and make sure history remembers why. But I'm not planning on dying. I'm planning on winning. She picked up the crown, placed it back on her head, looked at the captain. You want clemency. You'll get it, but you're coming with me. If you're lying about any of this, you die first. The captain nodded. Fair. Kira spoke quietly. I'm coming too. Someone needs to watch your back, and I'm tired of staying behind. Seraphine felt something warm in her chest. Gratitude. Trust. The kind of loyalty that couldn't be commanded, only earned. Then we leave within the hour, before the Sovereign decides patience isn't worth it. Draven stood, moved around the table, pulled Seraphine into his arms with the desperate intensity of someone who might be saying goodbye. Come back to me. Always. Promise. I promise I'll try. That's all anyone can do. His kiss was fierce, desperate. Everything he couldn't say compressed into contact. When they broke apart, his forehead pressed against hers. I love you. Past reason, past strategy, past everything that makes sense. I love you. I love you too. Which is why I'm doing this. Because love means protecting what matters even when it's terrifying. She stepped back before courage could fail her. Looked at Kira. Get the horses ready. Light armor. We're going as diplomats, not warriors. Kira saluted and left. The captain was escorted out under guard, leaving Seraphine and Draven alone in the war room with maps that showed their territory shrinking and the weight of history pressing down like stone. Draven's voice came quiet. What if this doesn't work? Then at least we tried something besides dying with swords in our hands. At least we proved that rulers can choose negotiation over massacre. That's optimistic. That's necessary. Optimism is all we have left when everything else fails. She walked toward the door, stopped at the threshold. Draven, when I come back, when this is over, can we please just have one day where nobody tries to kill us or conquer the Empire or test whether we're worthy of wearing crowns? His laugh came broken but genuine. I'll see what I can arrange. Good, because I'd really like to just exist with you for a while without the world ending. That sounds perfect. She left before the tears threatening behind her eyes could fall, because queens didn't cry before walking into enemy camps. They cried after, when they'd survived and earned the luxury of breaking down. The ride to the Sovereign's camp took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Seraphine rode at the front, Kira at her right, the captain whose name was Garrett at her left. White flags snapping in cold wind that carried the smell of coming snow. The Sovereign's forces parted to let them through. Silent. Watching. Hands on weapons but not drawing. Disciplined in a way that spoke of brutal training and absolute loyalty. They stopped at the center where the largest tent stood. Black fabric trimmed with silver wolf fur. No decoration. Pure function. The Iron Sovereign emerged like she'd been expecting them. She was tall, taller than most of the men surrounding her. Maybe 40 years old with gray streaking through dark hair, she wore in elaborate braids woven with small bones. Her armor was functional, scarred from actual combat. Her face was sharp angles and cold eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She studied Seraphine with the focus of a predator deciding if something was prey or competition, then spoke. Her voice was deep, accented with northern dialect. You're the Southern Queen, the one who walked into her uncle's camp and refused to break. Word travels. Seraphine kept her voice steady. In the North, we pay attention to rulers who do interesting things. Walking unarmed into hostile territory twice in 1 week qualifies as interesting, or stupid. The Sovereign's mouth curved slightly. Sometimes the difference is results. Then let's discuss results. You sent terms. We're here to propose alternatives. I sent terms because I assumed you'd be rational enough to recognize when you're beaten. The Sovereign gestured around them. 5,000 warriors, your fortress damaged, your forces exhausted. Surrender saves lives. Surrender also ends an empire built on something besides fear. Seraphine met her eyes without flinching. You united the wolf clans through strength and adoption. Impressive. But Noctarian was built on law and mutual benefit. Different foundation, different value. Empty words when you're facing annihilation. Maybe. Or maybe we're offering something you haven't considered, partnership instead of conquest. The Sovereign's eyes narrowed. Explain. You control the northern territories through military dominance. We control the south through established infrastructure and trade networks. You fight us and win. You get a fortress and a population that will resist you for generations. You'll spend years putting down rebellions and bleeding resources trying to hold territory that doesn't want you. The alternative. We acknowledge your sovereignty in the north. You acknowledge ours in the south. We establish borders, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts. You get access to our supply routes and manufacturing. We get security from northern raids. Everyone profits without bleeding each other dry. The Sovereign was quiet for a long moment. Around them, her commanders watched with expressions ranging from interest to hostility. Finally, she spoke. You're proposing a permanent division of the continent, 2 empires instead of 1. I'm proposing we stop pretending one empire can effectively govern everything from the ice wastes to the southern coast. I'm proposing we both get what we want without thousands dying to prove who's stronger. And if I refuse, if I still want Noctarian, then we fight. And maybe you win. Probably you win. But we'll make it cost you. We'll hold for weeks, bleed your forces, damage your reputation. When you finally take the fortress, you'll find it was a Pyrrhic victory that weakened you enough for other territories to challenge your authority." The sovereign smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. "You threaten me while proposing peace. That's bold. That's honest. Peace works because both sides prefer it to the alternative. I'm showing you the alternative so you understand what you're choosing." Garrett spoke up. "Your forces are raiders, Your Majesty. Besieging fortified positions isn't your strength. You'll take casualties you're not accustomed to. The wolf clans are loyal when you're winning. Extended siege will test that." The sovereign's eyes cut to him. "You fought with the northern clans. 3 years. Before I took service with House Vale. And you'd betray that knowledge to save your own skin. I'd share it to prevent unnecessary death. There's a difference." The sovereign studied him. Then Kira. Then back to Seraphine. "You bring a traitor and a scarred soldier to negotiate with me. Where's your king? Preparing defenses in case you're too proud to accept a reasonable offer." Seraphine kept her voice level. "He's also trusting me to handle this because we're partners. Not decoration and authority. Equals." Something flickered across the sovereign's face. Respect, maybe. Or interest. In the North, we have a saying, "Only fools and rulers walk into danger voluntarily." The difference is results. Then let's discuss results. What do you actually gain from extended war versus what you gain from partnership? The sovereign gestured toward her tent. "Come, we'll talk privately. Your companions wait here." Seraphine felt Kira tense beside her but nodded, dismounted, followed the sovereign into the tent alone. Inside was sparse. Maps. Weapons. A single chair that looked more functional than comfortable. The sovereign poured 2 cups of something that smelled sharp and herbal. She handed one to Seraphine. "It's not poisoned. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead." "Comforting?" The sovereign drank from her own cup. Seraphine followed suit. The liquid burned going down but warmed her chest. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 rulers who'd fought their way to power instead of inheriting it. 2 women who understood that crowns came with scars. Finally, the sovereign spoke. Her voice was quieter, almost human. "I've been fighting for 20 years. United 12 clans who spent centuries killing each other. Built something that resembles order in territory where chaos was the only law. And I'm tired." Seraphine waited. "Every victory costs more than the last. Every territory I absorb breeds new resistance. I thought taking Nocturne would solidify my authority. Show the clans that I can conquer anything. But you're right. Pyrrhic victory is still defeat, so you'll consider terms. I'll consider not being the kind of ruler who destroys everything worth having just to prove I can." The sovereign set down her cup. "Your offer. Permanent borders. Trade agreements. Mutual defense. What stops you from breaking those terms the moment you've recovered strength? The same thing that stops you. Self-interest. We both benefit more from peace than from endless war. Break the agreement and we're back to bleeding each other. Neither of us wants that. You trust very easily for someone who's been betrayed by family. I don't trust easily. I trust selectively. And I trust that you're smart enough to recognize a good deal when you see one." The sovereign laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rough and genuine. "I like you. In another life, we might have been friends. In another life, we might have killed each other." Also true. The sovereign moved to the map table, studied the territories marked in different colors. "Here's my counteroffer. Permanent border at the Ironwood River. Everything north is mine. Everything south is yours. Free trade across the border. Mutual defense against external threats. But any internal rebellions stay internal. We don't interfere in each other's governance. And if one of us falls to internal revolt, then natural selection runs its course. Sovereignty means handling your own problems." Seraphine considered. It was harsh, but fair. The kind of terms that worked because both sides had clear incentives to maintain them. "I'll need to discuss with Draven, but I think we can agree to those terms." "Good." The sovereign extended her hand. Not to shake. Palm up. Northern custom. Seraphine placed her palm against the sovereign's. Felt calluses that matched her own. "We have accord." The sovereign's voice carried formality now. "I'll withdraw my forces. We'll establish border checkpoints and trade negotiations within the month. Tell your king he married someone who just saved his empire. Tell your commanders they just avoided a siege that would have cost them more than glory was worth. Already done. They walked out of the tent together, into morning light that felt warmer somehow, like the sun itself approved of rulers choosing negotiation over massacre. Kira's relief was visible. Garrett looked shocked. The sovereign addressed her commanders. We withdraw peacefully. The Southern Queen has offered terms that serve our interests better than siege. Spread the word. There were murmurs, some approval, some disappointment from those who'd been anticipating battle, but discipline held. The sovereign looked at Seraphine one last time. You're dangerous, in the best way. Don't waste it. I'll try not to. Good. Because the world needs rulers who think before they burn. We're too rare as it is. Then she turned and walked toward her own commanders to begin the complex process of withdrawing an army that had been prepared for war. Seraphine stood there feeling exhausted and victorious, and slightly stunned that it had actually worked. Kira appeared at her shoulder. Did you just negotiate a permanent peace treaty? I think so. I'm not entirely sure. It happened fast. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever watched. Good. Terrifying gets results. You're starting to sound like Draven. I'm going to take that as a compliment. They rode back toward Nocturne with white flags still flying and news that would change everything. The fortress gates opened before them like arms welcoming them home, and standing on the battlements watching them approach was Draven. When Seraphine reached him, she dismounted and walked into his arms without saying anything. Just let him hold her while her body finally acknowledged how close she'd come to dying. Again. His voice came rough against her hair. Tell me you just did something brilliant and insane. I negotiated a permanent peace treaty with the most dangerous warlord in the north. Of course you did. She pulled back, looked up at him. We survived. The Empire survives. We get to keep building without fighting a war we couldn't win. Draven's eyes were wet again. You're impossible. I learned from the best. He kissed her then, in front of the entire fortress, in front of soldiers and civilians and anyone who cared to watch. And Seraphine kissed him back because they'd earned this, earned the right to just be two people who loved each other without the weight of empires crushing down. When they finally broke apart, Kira was grinning. So, about that day where nobody tries to kill us, Draven laughed. I think we just bought ourselves several. Good. Seraphine leaned into him. Because I'd really like to sleep for approximately 3 days straight. That can be arranged. And then maybe we can focus on actually governing instead of just surviving. Revolutionary concept. Around them, the fortress slowly relaxed. Soldiers stood down from battle positions. Civilians emerged from shelters. The tension that had held everything tight finally released. The war was over. Not through victory or defeat. Through the radical concept that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to fight. 6 months later, the Empire of Nocturne looked different. The eastern territories that Cedric had burned were recovering under governance that actually invested in infrastructure instead of just extracting resources. Trade routes with the sovereign's northern territories brought prosperity. Neither empire could have achieved alone. Laws were being reformed. Corruption rooted out. The kind of work that didn't make legends but built foundations that lasted. Seraphine stood in the council chamber reviewing reports on grain distribution when Draven appeared with something in his hands. He looked tired, but good. The kind of tired that came from honest work, instead of surviving constant crisis. I have something for you. He extended a small wooden box. Simple, no decoration, just craftsmanship. She opened it. Inside was a ring, dark metal inscribed with words in the old language. She looked up at him, questioning. It says together, even when apart, especially when it's impossible. Draven, I know we're already married. I know we already chose each other when it mattered most. But I wanted you to have something that wasn't about politics or alliance. Just us. Seraphine felt tears she'd been holding for months finally breaking free. He took the ring, slipped it onto her finger. You saved this empire. Not through conquest, through courage and intelligence and refusing to accept that violence was the only option. You taught me that power and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, that strength means knowing when to fight and when to build. She looked at the ring, at him, at the future they were creating together. I couldn't have done any of it without you. without the foundation you built, without the trust you gave me even when it terrified you. We did it together. Together. She kissed him. Soft and gentle. The kind of kiss that wasn't about passion, but about coming home. Behind them, someone cleared their throat. Kira stood in the doorway looking pleased and slightly embarrassed. Sorry to interrupt, but we have visitors. The Sovereign sent an envoy. Something about establishing formal trade councils. Draven groaned. Can't we have one day? Apparently not. Kira's grin was wicked. You're rulers. This is the job. She left. Seraphine looked at Draven, ready to actually govern instead of just survive. As ready as I'll ever be. They walked toward the council chamber together, hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. And as they moved through corridors that had seen so much violence and fear and desperate choices, Seraphine understood the final truth about power that nobody tells you until you've earned it through blood and sacrifice. It's not about dominating others. It's about becoming strong enough to be gentle, brave enough to choose peace, wise enough to know that building lasts longer than burning. She'd started this journey as a daughter being sold to survive her family's collapse. She'd become a queen who understood that crowns were wounds, but chose to wear hers anyway because the alternative was letting everything fall to those who confused cruelty with strength. The Empire would face new challenges, new threats, new impossible choices, but they'd face them together. And maybe that was the only real power that mattered, not the ability to destroy, but the choice to build something worth defending. Even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Outside the window, snow began to fall over Nocturne, covering everything in white that looked clean but hid complexity underneath. And somewhere in the fortress, a child laughed. The sound echoed through stone corridors like a promise, like hope refusing to die. Like the future they were building one decision at a time. Seraphine squeezed Draven's hand. He squeezed back. And together they walked into the council chamber to do the work that nobody sang songs about, but that determined whether empires survived or collapsed. The unglamorous work of governance, the daily choice to build instead of burn, the quiet heroism of rulers who understood that lasting power came not from fear, but from proving every single day that you were worth following. The crown still felt heavy. It always would, but she'd learned to carry it, and that made all the difference.